Chapter 947. The phone was hung up in Li Tianlan's laughter. Xinyuan City was brightly lit at night. The streets were clean and tidy. The buildings were exquisite and magnificent. The grass was green, the flowers were in full bloom, and the trees were neat. The lights were on. It was as if the entire city had been draped in a colorful coat of light. The night here was not so noisy and bustling, but there was a kind of vitality from silence and beauty. Qin Weibai quietly looked at the scenes outside the window. She didn't say a word and just watched in silence. Why do you suddenly want to go back to the headquarters of the Lin clan? Horsewoman drove and suddenly asked in a low voice. It's really beautiful. Qin Weibai looked out of the window and muttered to herself. Then she laughed at herself. I'm afraid it's not mine. Horsewoman frowned and was a little puzzled. I just saw Jiang Shangyu. Qin Weibai lowered her head and whispered. Horsewoman responded. She also saw it, although she didn't know what Jiang Shangyu talked to the boss. When I met Jiang Shangyu, Tianlan also saw Jiang Shangyu. Qin Weibai's voice was deep and quiet. The black Rolls-Royce suddenly stopped in the middle of driving. Qin Weibai's body swayed and leaned forward slightly. Horsewoman's face changed dramatically. She suddenly looked back at Qin Weibai in disbelief. Qin Weibai was in Tianan. Li Tianlan was in Yuzhou. The two of them saw Jiang Shangyu at the same time? How is this possible? Horsewoman subconsciously raised her voice, a little incredulous. Nothing is impossible, Qin Weibai said indifferently. Just like now, I'm in Tianan, but I'm also in the headquarters of the Lin clan. Horsewoman breathed violently. At that moment, she was completely stunned. Horsewoman frowned tightly and looked solemn. And the palace master. Probably the same. It's hard to explain what's going on. But I can come back, so can he. Qin Weibai whispered. Horsewoman's brain was a little confused. After a while, she understood what it meant. We have enemies. Horsewoman took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, an unimaginable enemy. There were 12 supermasters in the Samsara Palace. But the status of supermasters was also high and low. In reality, Fire Flaming Realm, one of the 12 supermasters was naturally the most important, and he was once the only supermaster of the Invincible Realm. Next were the military counselor and the saint. And then there were the dukes and generals whose strength was only second to the saint and the military advisor. Instead, there were the knights whose strength might not be the best, but were absolutely loyal. They knew the origin of the palace master from the very beginning. They also knew the inside story of the initial rise and rapid development of the Samsara Palace. The 12 supermasters were very high profile in the dark world. Lurk in the shadows, the saber of Zhongzhou's state. A strategist who had absolute control over the economy. The Flourishing Age Fund, whose funds could sweep the world, certainly had Han Dongluo's ability, but it also had the foresight of the palace master. For more than a decade, they seized the opportunities again and again, and the Samsara Palace completed its accumulation at the fastest speed. The core of all this was the master of Samsara Palace. She was the master of Samsara Palace who knew what would happen before it happened. But now, the master of Samsara Palace was in an extremely bad state. She was almost dead. Jiang Shangyu appeared. Jiang Shangyu, who could predict the future like the master of Samsara Palace, appeared. Horsewoman couldn't imagine how powerful Jiang Shangyu had secretly cultivated. The fact that he could openly appear in front of Qin Weibai and Li Tianlan already showed his attitude. He was so confident that he could almost be fearless of everything. It's not that serious, Qin Weibai shook her head. His state is a little special. When I came back that year, my foster father spent a lot of effort to stabilize my injury. Then, at the earliest time, I found myself. Jiang Shangyu was not so lucky. He's been in a bad state these years and can't do too many things. But since he dared to appear in front of me, it means that he is indeed ready. It's a little troublesome, but it's not impossible to solve. Horsewoman was silent for a long time before she whispered, what was Jiang Shangyu's strength in his heyday? He broke through the peak of the Invincible Realm and was only half a step away from the real Supreme. He was a person who really exerted the heavenly king heart to the extreme. His willpower was indestructible, and his cultivation progressed rapidly. He could constantly make up for his shortcomings while making progress. He was not the same as the trash in Kunlun City, who also had the Heavenly King heart, but was not even in the invincible realm. In that era, Tianlan in his peak state could ignore everything. After Tianlan, Wang Tianzong managed to enter that realm, but it was not perfect. Then, Wang Shengxiao was the closest to that realm. After the father and son of the Wang family of Beihai, it was Jiang Shangyu, followed by Lin Yuxian of the Lin clan. If we talk about the combat capability in his heyday, Jiang Shangyu in his peak state is stronger than Mr. Lin and Li Kuang too. If we really want to compare, he is probably similar to Tribulation in his peak state and Wang Tianzong when he left Reki City. If it weren't for Ruthless, I wouldn't have been able to kill him and Wang Shengxiao. Well, at that time, Ruthless didn't break out with all his strength, but really self-destructed. It wanted to kill not only Wang Shengxiao and Jiang Shangyu, but also me. It destroyed everything, and then it became what it is now. Then now, Horsewoman wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. He has the blood of vermilion bird and black tortoise that have evolved to the last stage in his body. At present, no one in the world can solve this level of poison. At most, they can barely suppress it. It is impossible for him to return to his peak state. Now, Tianlan is only short of accumulation and the final transformation from the real supreme realm. With Ruthless, he can't threaten Tianlan's safety. But since he dared to appear, it means that he should also have the ability to protect himself. Qin Weibai's voice gradually became a little low. I'm not worried about what will happen to Tianlan. Now, except for himself, there should be no one who can hurt him. Jiang Shangyu is a bit tricky, but there will be time to deal with him in the future. Her voice became softer and softer. What I'm worried about now is how to tell Tianlan about this. This should be told to His Majesty. Horsewoman was slightly shocked. How can I not tell him? Qin Weibai smiled bitterly. It's meaningless to hide such a serious thing. We must let Tianlan know the possible consequences of Jiang Shangyu and his current strength. How can he not tell him? Horsewoman fell silent. So, she was silent for a long time before hesitantly saying, "Did you go back to the headquarters of the Lin clan to see the situation of the palace master?" Yes and no. Qin Weibai shook her head, leaned against the seat, and closed her eyes. I'm really tired. She whispered, staying with Tianlan. I'm very happy, but also very tired. I know I am. We have the same thoughts, the same behavior, and even when we stand together, we have the same feeling. Can you understand? When I'm with me, it's not that I know what you're thinking. It's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking. My thoughts, senses, movements, everything is exactly the same, without each other. I am me. When I'm with her, at close distance, I don't need to read the notebook that deepens the impression at all. I can directly read the pictures that I haven't experienced in that era, but I have experienced them from my mind. We are the same person. I firmly believe it, accept it, and even believe it. But it's still very tiring. When I see Tianlan, I can take it for granted that we are the same person. But when I'm with him, every time he looks at me, hugs me, and even presses on me, I feel that he is looking at another person. That person is me, but not me. This kind of feeling, Qin Weibai's voice was a little desperate. Do you understand? Horsewoman was silent for a long time before she shook her head slightly. In fact, whether I am me or not, in Tianlan's eyes, maybe it's different. In Military Counselor's heart, it's the same in Flaming Fire's heart, and it should be the same in his heart. So, Jiang Shangyu said that I'm an imposter. Oh, I really can't be an imposter. In fact, before this, we knew the existence of Jiang Shangyu. I'm just not sure who he is. I imagined the day when all this would be exposed, but I didn't expect it to come so soon. Jiang Shangyu is an enemy. His Majesty may not believe what he said. Horsewoman comforted with a pale face. I'm not sure if it's a lie, but things have come to this point. Maybe it's not a lie, but a lie. Qin Weibai muttered to herself, I'm really tired. You don't understand that kind of feeling. I love him as much as I love him. It's a completely consistent, strong feeling. But in his heart, I may be different. I don't want to go on like this. She whispered, every time I see myself in the Lin clan, I will firmly believe that we are the same person. So I want to go back and see my own state. In any case, at the right time, I will tell Tianlan everything. I'm his woman, not my substitute. I want him to accept the real me, nothing else. It's hard to understand. Horsewoman was silent for a long time before she said frankly, I can understand your incomprehension. Qin Weibai smiled. That's why I feel so tired. If, Horsewoman hesitated. What if His Majesty doesn't accept your identity? If he thinks you are not you, like flaming fire, what will you do then? There's no way. Qin Weibai's eyes were calm and a little empty. With Jiang Shangyu's existence, this seemingly flawless secret will be revealed sooner or later. Tianlan will know it sooner or later. The only difference is whether I tell him or someone else tells him. It's better to get the pain over with, she whispered. When I come back from the Lin clan, I will confess everything to him. Even the light outside the window shone on her face. That exquisite and perfect dreamy face was pale and almost transparent. She shook her head hard and whispered, even if it's my end. Chapter 948. In the dead of night, Li Tianlan sat on the rooftop of the sanatorium and enjoyed the breeze. Once again, Wuqing turned into Li Tianlan and sat with him. The vast and majestic sword energy fluctuated with its appearance. The dense sword energy spread from the rooftop and eventually covered the whole sanatorium. This sword chi was so perfect and flawless that it didn't even have a single flaw. Instead, it looked like an airtight domain. Li Tianlan reached out his hand and poked the sword energy around him in boredom. The sword energy was like a transparent cover. As he stretched his fingers forward, the sword energy broke one after another like a cover. The small holes appeared one after another and were silently patched by Wuqing. Then he poked it again and patched it again slowly. A man and a sword played the game out of boredom. Eventually, the whole sanatorium was filled with surging sword light. Your Majesty, a voice suddenly rang out at the door of the rooftop. Saint walked over with a food box and a pot of wine. He said helplessly, What are you doing? Li Tianlan answered blankly, as if he couldn't react. Wuqing silently withdrew the domain of sword energy and turned it into a cloak. He put on Li Tianlan to block the cold wind. Saint shook his head with a bitter smile. He had been pursuing swordsmanship all his life. He was the sword master of Mount Shu. Later, he became a saint. He still learned Dongcheng Huangtu's swordsmanship, which was also Li Tianlan's swordsmanship. Now that he had entered the invincible realm, his perception of swordsmanship had reached the extreme. He had fallen asleep, but Li Tianlan and Wuqing's game seemed to be silent. However, the surging sword energy was like a dazzling light to Saint, easily dispelling all his sleepiness. It was his boss who disturbed his dreams. What else could he do? He could only pack up and rush over. Can't sleep? Saint walked to Li Tianlan and sat down beside him. He opened the food box. There was only a stack of spiced beef in the food box. It was simple, but it was enough. There were 2 empty cups beside the beef. Saint took out the cups, handed one to Li Tianlan, and poured wine for him. The wine was mellow and slightly warm. Last time I went back to Tianan, I asked for a batch of good wine from Senior Yu. The Huadiao wine he made is very famous even in the Hidden Dragon Sea Council. Saint said with a smile. Li Tianlan's eyes were in a trance. He took a sip of wine and became more and more silent. His Majesty can't sleep? Is there something on your mind? Saint asked again. I'm fine. It's just, I don't know what you're thinking. Li Tianlan was somewhat absent-minded. He really didn't know what he was thinking, but his mind was a little chaotic, and he didn't feel sleepy at all. He grabbed a piece of beef with sauce and put it into his mouth. He shook his head hard and took another sip of wine. I'm thinking about a lot of things, he said softly. The future of Emperor Dong's palace, my future amidst the Li family, my grandpa, the carefree life of the Wang family of Beihai, and the Lin clan, my own life experience, a lot of things. It's a mess, or maybe I don't think about anything. Your Majesty is thinking about the Dongxing clan? Saint asked with a smile after a moment of silence. Maybe, Li Tianlan nodded. Parents, Mom and Dad. This word is very strange. He gulped down the wine and shook his head slightly. There were some things that were completely different from saying it out loud. Li Shi, who sobered up, told his life experience in the clearest manner as the person involved. It was a very strange feeling. For a long time, he didn't quite understand why the Dongxing clan would give him unconditionally. He didn't understand why the giant group made plans with him as the core. He didn't understand why Dongxing Wudi and Bai Qingxian accepted Qin Weibai and Wang Yuetong so easily. He didn't understand why Bai Qingxian and the Dongshan clan almost turned against each other and became enemies. He didn't understand why Bai Qingxian and the Dongshan clan almost fell out and became enemies. He slowly realized something, and everything Li Shi said was the answer to all his incomprehensible questions. Li Qianlon's heart was a little chaotic, but he couldn't tell what specific emotion it was. It was a very subtle psychological activity, so subtle that he didn't even form any specific emotion or feeling. He fought with Gu Xingyun, attended the meeting of the parliament, watched the changes in Beijing, listened to Lin Fengting talk about the origin of murderous weapons, and watched Jiang Shangyu perform to his heart's content. Today was undoubtedly very lively, and he lived a fulfilling life. When everything was over and he was alone, Li Tianlon's mind became a little complicated. I thought your majesty was worried about the next decisive battle in Beihai. Saint smiled. Li Tianlon shook his head and didn't speak. He really didn't think about it, even if he knew the existence of Wuyo. No matter whether it was self-confidence or brainlessness, Li Tianlon's heart was firm. He was sure that he was invincible now, and he didn't care who his opponent was. Subtle footsteps sounded from behind the two of them, and they didn't hide it. Li Tianlon and Saint turned back at the same time. Li Shi, who was dressed neatly and looked a little pale, appeared at the door of the rooftop. Li Tianlon raised his eyebrows slightly. "Are you going out?" he asked directly. Li Shi nodded and whispered, "I will come back before I go to Xinyuan City tomorrow." Li Tianlon nodded and asked subconsciously, "Where are we going?" Li Shi shook her head and didn't say much. She had a free identity, and from tomorrow on, a new life. If this night was a farewell to the past, then Li Shi always felt that she should say thank you to some people. Li Tianlon took a deep look at her and didn't ask any more questions. He just said, "Be careful on the way. Go early and come back early." Li Shi said yes and turned to leave. Saint watched her back gradually disappear, then shook his head and whispered, "It's so late, Your Majesty." Where did she say she was going? Li Tianlon was silent for a while, then said softly, "I don't know." At the same time, Tianan, Xinyuan City. In an exquisite hotel suite in the city center, Jiang Shangyu opened the door and saw himself standing outside the door. "I just received the news." Without any pleasantries, Jiang Shangyu said, "Qin Weibai has left Tianan." There was an inexplicable aura surging in the room. The space was slightly distorted. A blurry and hazy cloud and starlight completely enveloped his body. He became His Majesty again. It should be the problem of the Jiang family of South America. After all, she is the patriarch of the Lin clan. His Majesty said, not surprised at all, "It's a pity." If she stayed in Xinyuan City, Jiang Shangyu shook his head slightly. Everyone was afraid of the fallen master of Samsara Palace. But in terms of force, no one would be afraid of Qin Weibai. Many people were afraid of His Majesty, but no one was afraid of Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu was too young to become a real expert of the invincible realm. His Majesty was different. His physical strength was fixed. In terms of strength, what he needed was not progress, but recovery. What was more, Qin Weibai basically knew nothing about martial arts. If he could control him, Li Tianlon wouldn't be able to hold on to Li Qingchen. How could it be so simple? His Majesty shook his head, was silent for a while, and asked, "How's Dad?" "There's no problem," Jiang Shangyu said. "The pension will be in place within 3 days. During this time, Dad will talk to some people in Beijing and control them so that there won't be any accidents. In other words, control Beijing so that there won't be any accidents." 3 days, His Majesty whispered to himself, nodded, and said, "Then 3 days later, I'll fight Li Tianlan." Jiang Shangyu raised his eyebrows slightly. "Then I'll start to sleep tomorrow." His Majesty nodded and said slowly, "Let's sleep longer this time. 3 days later, I'll fight Li Tianlan, and at the same time, it will officially start the final battle in Beihai and the chaos in East Island. In order to prevent accidents, don't stop sleeping. There's not enough nutrient solution." Jiang Shangyu frowned slightly. "I know, so I'll solve everything as soon as possible." His Majesty smiled. "If everything goes well, when I wake up, Li Tianlan should have died. He refused to be my friend, so I'll let him know how serious the consequences of his refusal will be." Jiang Shangyu shrugged. "Be careful. I don't think Li Tianlan is so simple now. That's how I feel." "Of course I know." His Majesty's voice was calm. "That's why we need this final battle as a test." He took out his mobile phone, opened the address book, and directly dialed Li Guangtu's number. The phone rang twice, and then it was picked up. Li Guangtu's deep voice sounded a little dignified. "What's the matter? Don't be nervous." His Majesty smiled. "Nothing has changed. I'm just telling you a sudden decision." Li Guangtu was silent for a moment. On the other end of the phone, he seemed to look at the time, and then his voice became a little irritated. "Say it. 3 days later, I'll challenge Li Tianlan." His Majesty's voice was calm and firm. Li Guangtu suddenly fell silent. He seemed to be trying hard to digest the news. After a while, he asked why. "It doesn't matter." His Majesty's voice was calm. "Well, it doesn't matter," Li Guangtu repeated, and his voice became lower and lower. "So, you want me to cooperate with you?" The original plan was to cooperate with His Majesty in the final battle in Beihai, sneak attack Li Tianlan, and kill him with one blow. But His Majesty, who was hiding in the dark, suddenly decided to come out. Didn't he need to consider the final battle in Beihai? "No, there's no need." His Majesty said blandly, "I'll test his strength first. Believe me, for now, I'm one of the people who knows Li Tianlan, Wuqing, and the 13th floor the best. Only when I make a move can I determine his current state. This final battle will attract everyone's attention. Taking advantage of this opportunity, my friends and I will complete the final infiltration in these 3 days. Your Highness, if there's nothing else, we can probably enter Beihai tomorrow to make the early preparations." Li Guangtu chuckled and said in a strange tone, "Attract everyone's attention? Are you sure that the challenge won't be regarded as a clown and then completely ignored?" "No," Jiang Shangyu said softly. "In this era, no one dares to ignore me, including Li Tianlan." Chapter 949. At dawn, Dong Chengwudi opened his eyes and found that the warm, soft, and fragrant body beside him seemed to have left for a long time. Half of the quilt had become cold, just like the feeling in the past many years. He was in a trance for a while, as if he was not sure whether it was reality or a dream. After more than 10 seconds, he laughed at himself, sat up slowly, put on his clothes, and walked out of the room. The lights were on in the corridor of the villa outside the door. Because it was on the 4th floor, in a more private space, the small reception area at the corner at the end of the corridor had been transformed into a small kitchen. Dong Chengwudi sniffed, and his expression became softer. Bai Qingxian, who got up early, was frying eggs in the small kitchen. Beside her was cooked porridge and a few strangely shaped deep-fried pancakes that had been completed. Hungry, Dong Chengwudi walked to the kitchen and looked at his wife. He laughed and said, "If I wait a little longer, Sister will probably get up. Why did you cook in person today?" "I made breakfast for both of us." Bai Qingxian, who was wearing an apron, put the fried eggs on the plate and whispered, "I have a flight this afternoon." Dong Chengwudi froze for a moment and then fell silent. Bai Qingxian was the speaker of Liaodong. Naturally, she could not stay in Yuzhou. During this time, she had been holding meetings in Yuzhou. There was less than a year before the election, and all aspects were sensitive. Today, she would go to the Hidden Dragon Sea to attend a speakers' conference of Zhongzhou State, which was also the highlight of this series of meetings, or even the finale. This meeting could basically determine some things that all parties have been psychologically prepared for, and even determined by Qingqian's new position after the election. Then she would rush back to Liaodong overnight. The next time the couple would meet would probably be the election in October next year. I may not have time to see you off. It depends on the situation. I'll try my best to make time. Dongqing Wudi was silent for a moment and whispered, "No need." Bai Qingqian scooped 2 bowls of porridge and placed some delicate and delicious side dishes on the table. "You do what you need to do. I'll try my best to come back during the Spring Festival." Dongqing Wudi gave a wry smile and shook his head. The Spring Festival was a holiday for ordinary people, but for them, it was impossible for them to be idle at all, especially in the year before the general election. It was almost impossible for the speakers to leave their posts. Even if Bai Qingqian could really come back, Dongqing Wudi would be too busy during the Spring Festival. He had to go to various places in Zhongzhou State on behalf of the army headquarters to pay New Year's greetings to the soldiers and inspect their work. Can't bear to part with it. Bai Qingqian sat down, raised her eyebrows, and said with a faint smile, "At most, I can return to Yuzhou in a year. Can't you wait a year?" "How is this a year?" Dongqing Wudi sighed and frowned. He no longer had the demeanor of a god of massacre. "I waited for more than 20 years before I tasted the sweetness." Bai Qingqian's face turned red. She angrily picked up her chopsticks and knocked Dongqing Wudi on the head, saying bitterly, "You're talking nonsense." "It's the truth." Dongqing Wudi felt a little helpless. Bai Qingqian held her chopsticks, and her face became redder. The relationship between them had been stiff for more than 20 years, and they almost became enemies. Although their relationship had eased a little in recent years, as a husband and wife, they had only recently started to sleep together. Dongqing Wudi was reluctant to leave, and Bai Qingqian naturally didn't want to leave. But she had responsibilities. What else could she do but leave? She lowered her head and took a sip of porridge. She said calmly, "Isn't the Black Dragon Army in Longjiang?" "Yes." Dongqing Wudi nodded subconsciously. Bai Qingqian glared at him. "I can't come back during the Spring Festival. Can't you inspect the Northeast?" Dongqing Wudi suddenly came to his senses. He giggled and nodded. "Yes, you're right. It's settled. I'll inspect your place during the Spring Festival." Bai Qingqian snorted softly, drank the porridge, and asked casually, "After the election, your part-time job should be removed, right?" "Yes." Dongqing Wudi nodded and said, "It's not necessarily after the election. It could be before." He was the executive minister of the army headquarters, and his part-time job was the commander of the Border Control Corps. In the entire army headquarters, the Border Control Corps occupied a very important corps position. The commander's rank of marshal was enough to show the importance that Zhongzhou State attached to the Border Control Corps. After Di Jiang resigned, Dongqing Wudi had been holding this position for more than 2 years, which was a miracle. Before and after the election, Dongqing Wudi had to step down from this position. The academics, the Southeast Group, and the Prince Group were all reluctant to let Dongqing Wudi continue to hold this position. Dongqing Wudi's prestige was too high, especially in the Border Control Corps. He had been a commander for more than 20 years, and he was the soul and core of hundreds of thousands of troops in the Border Control Corps. Although he was now the commander, as long as he was still in the Border Control Corps, even if he was just a soldier, as long as he was there, there would be no room for others to intervene in the Border Control Corps. Other groups would rather let a person from the giant group take control of the Border Control Corps than see Dongqing Wudi continue to occupy this position, especially the Southeast Group. This position was originally traded from the Dongchang clan with great difficulty and finally given away. The grievance and helplessness were indescribable. Naturally, they wanted to regain some of the right to speak in the Border Control Corps. This position had now become an important bargaining chip for the giant group to trade with all parties in the election, and the benefits that could be traded had even exceeded expectations. "What about the successor?" Bai Qingqian whispered. "Is it the Eagle King of the Leaf family? Or Thunder God?" This issue was also the focus of many people's attention, and it could be said to be the most sensitive focus before and after the election. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath and frowned. After a while, he shook his head and said, "It's hard to say now. The Eagle King has enough qualifications, but some people are talking about his lack of experience in leading troops for so many years. Thunder God's qualifications are a little worse. and he's not even a general. In short, there are obstacles in front of both of them. In this respect, although we cooperate with the Southeast also has its own opinion. At the end of the day, they're not really against the Eagle King or Thunder God. Either of them is fine. What they want is some other positions in the Border Control Corps after the two of them go up. So we can push any one of them up now, and then it's nothing more than a deal. The reason why we haven't issued this appointment now is that we haven't reached a new balance. To be honest, we can give up some positions, but we don't want to give too many. The current situation is very simple. Whether it's the Eagle King or Thunder God, we have to give up at least a third of the Border Control Corps. We even have to give up nearly half of the right to speak. The price is too high. Moreover, the Border Control Corps has a special status and duties. Such a deal is not a good thing for the Corps. Bai Qingqian blinked her eyes and whispered, "So, what you said, a big brother, is true." Dongqing Wudi was stunned for a moment before he remembered what he had said to Bai Qingzhao before. He hesitated and nodded, saying, "I've also communicated with the two old masters about this matter, but no decision has been made yet." Dongqing Wudi paused and said thoughtfully, "Now the most important thing is the result of the final battle in Beihai. If Tianlan's performance is strong enough, the Border Control Corps will have the perfect candidate." The Border Control Corps was too big. In a sense, it could almost be said to be the most important large-scale integrated army in Zhongzhou State. It was the only one. For such a behemoth, there were all kinds of problems with the Eagle King or the Thunder God. Emperor Dong's palace was extremely powerful now, so such problems could not be an obstacle. But if they wanted to achieve their goal, the giant group also needed to pay some price. Under such circumstances, the most correct approach for the giant group was to bypass the Eagle King and Thunder God and directly push forward a person who was perfect and strong in all aspects. He was so strong that once the giant group pushed forward this candidate, no one could find a reason to object. As long as he was pushed forward, everyone would take it for granted that he was the new commander of the Border Control Corps. He was the most suitable and even irreplaceable. Such a person was hard to find. The most suitable meant that there was only one. Compared with the major groups in Zhongzhou State, there was only one such person. It was hard to find, but it didn't mean that the giant group didn't have one. Dongqing Wudi had always had such a trump card in his hand, but he had been hesitating whether to play it or not. When this card was played, no one would object, and no one was qualified to object. It also meant that in the transfer of the supreme power of the Border Control Corps, the price that the giant group had to pay to other groups was much smaller. But if this card was played, the giant group might also lose another trump card, which would also bring some trouble. So Dongqing Wudi needed some new situations. The situation formed after the final battle in Beihai was undoubtedly a good entry point. But the premise was that the situation after the final battle was in line with expectations. Tianlan, Bai Qingqian's eyes were a little worried. Someone outside has already called him His Majesty. Is he really invincible? Is he really as rumored? The final battle in Beihai was the key point and the beginning of the Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan was bound to be involved in it. This was a step he had to take. Bai Qingqian couldn't stop it, and she didn't want to, but she had never let go of the worry in her heart. It was said that there were several invincible realm experts involved in the final battle, and none of them would be on the side of Beihai. Li Tianlan hadn't entered the invincible realm yet, don't worry. Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while and said with a smile, Tianlan has grown to this point. The worst result can guarantee that he can retreat from the final battle unscathed. Bai Qingqian nodded with a heavy heart. Just as she was about to say something, a middle-aged woman who looked to be in her early 50s had already walked up quietly. Bai Qingqian looked back and was a little surprised. She whispered, Nanny Wu, what's the matter? Speaker, I was just about to cook when I saw someone standing outside. She just stood there, motionless. I asked the minister's guards, and they said that she had been standing there in the middle of the night. The guards asked her and said that she wanted to see you, but she didn't allow anyone to disturb your rest. Ah, she has been standing there for several hours. Bai Qingqian stood up in a daze and asked curiously, Who is it? I don't know. I asked her who she was, but she didn't tell me. Nanny Wu shook her head. Bai Qingqian frowned and looked at Dongqing Wudi. They got up and went downstairs at the same time and turned on the manor surveillance in the living room. In the cold morning wind, a somewhat thin figure appeared on the screen. Quiet, gentle, beautiful, and elegant. Bai Qingqian glanced at her. Her first feeling was that she didn't know her, but then she felt a little familiar. She thought for a long time, then slightly raised her eyebrows and said in surprise, "Li Shi?" Dongqing Wudi nodded and whispered, "It seems to be true." This chapter is on the 9th. Chapter 950. Although it was a little strange that Li Shi suddenly appeared here, for Dongqing Wudi and his wife, she was not an uninvited guest with bad intentions. After the surprise, Bai Qingqian put on a coat and walked quickly to the door. At the same time, she asked Nanny Wu to make tea. Li Shi stood quietly at the door. Perhaps because it had been a long time, her body was stained with a lot of morning dew. She looked a little hazy and colder. In the dark corners around the manor, gazes fell on her, intentionally or unintentionally. They observe her every move without malice or kindness. As the third most powerful person in Zhongzhou State, Dongqing Wudi's guards were undoubtedly the best in Zhongzhou State. 8 guards in 2 shifts protected Dongqing Wudi 24 hours a day. The 8 guards were all experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm from the Border Control Corps. Their courage and professionalism were beyond doubt. They left the Border Control Corps and entered the shadow sect of Zhongzhou State. What they learned was the sword formations passed down from the Li family's Zhuanyuan Tai. There were about 4 or 5 people in a group, and each group was a small sword formation. The sword formation was not very aggressive, but it was unparalleled in defense. Hundreds of years ago, after the ancestor of the Li family became the god of war of Zhongzhou State, he once used the 30-meter mortal world domain of the Jiang family of South America, which was known as the best defense in the world, to create 2 sets of protective sword formations with slightly different functions. It became a unique skill that the bodyguards of the Hidden Dragon Sea practiced all the time. In the following hundreds of years, the successive patriarchs of the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai would fine-tune the sword formations, and the various combinations of the sword formations became more and more sophisticated. As far as the guards around Dongqing Wudi were concerned, the sword formation composed of 4 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm might not be a match for an expert of the invincible realm, but an ordinary expert of the invincible realm could not break the sword formation in a short time. Li Shi also knew this nameless protective sword formation. Every god of war of Zhongzhou State would fine-tune the sword formation. In the past 20 years, Kunlun City was undoubtedly responsible for this work. Kunlun City was responsible for it. It was not Gu Xingyun who was in charge. In fact, in the final analysis, Gu Xingyun, who had not reached the peak of the invincible realm and was barely close to this realm, could not make any fine-tuning suggestions for this sword formation. This work had always been done by Li Shi, who had already reached the peak of the invincible realm. Li Shi naturally knew the sword formation very well. At this time, she was standing in the most convenient place for the guards to observe. Her every move was full of sincerity. So, after a short exchange, the guards hesitated and did not choose to expel her. The black car came from the depths of the manor. Mad 1, Gad 2. Li Shi's eyebrows moved slightly. Before the car came to a complete stop, Bai Qingqian had already opened the door and walked over with almost a trot. "Welcome to the Bai family, Ms. Li Shi." Bai Qingqian's smile was impeccable, gentle, but her eyes looking at Li Shi were somewhat complicated that was difficult to hide. She put another coat of her own in her hand on Li Shi, who was wearing very thin clothes, and whispered, "I should have called in advance. As long as you come, it doesn't matter how late you are." The corner of Li Shi's mouth moved. It seemed that she wanted to say something, but she couldn't say it for a while. Draped in a warm coat, her stiff body seemed to gradually warm up. She glanced over by Qingqian and looked at Dongqing Wudi, who came out of the driver's seat. Dongqing Wudi nodded with a smile and said nothing. Li Shi bowed slightly. Her movements were slow, but they became bigger and bigger. Finally, she turned from a slight bow into a deep bow. It was extremely quiet. Bai Qingqian was a little overwhelmed. She subconsciously reached out to hold Li Shi, feeling a little confused. She knew Li Shi, but she didn't know her at all. In her memory, they met very few times when they were very young many years ago. As the most outstanding young women of that era, Xie Ji, who was by Wang Tianzong's side, Li Shi, who was by Li Guangtu's side, and by Qing Xian, who was by Dong Chengwudi's side, each of them had their own elegance. When they met occasionally, they just nodded to each other as a greeting. She still remembered that when Dong Chengwudi was young, he once fought with Li Guangtu, and Dong Chengwudi suffered a little loss. Since then, Bai Qingqian seemed to be displeased with Li Guangtu, and Li Shi, Bai Qingqian's mind was in a mess for a moment, and her memories flew farther and farther. Li Shi's somewhat hoarse and dry voice sounded. "I've thought about it for a long time," she said quietly. "Maybe you won't accept it, but in any case, I should say thank you to you. Thank you for taking care of Rushi for so many years and taking good care of her. Thank you." Even if most of the news was blocked in Kunlun City, she could still roughly know about Dongqing Rushi's situation in a few meetings with Xian Xuanzi. After all, Dongqing Rushi was her biological daughter, and she had always kept an eye on her. The baby, who should have been the legitimate grandson of the Dongchang clan, was given to Li Honghe by Dongcheng Hongguang and Dongcheng Wudi. The girl, who should have been the down-and-out princess of the Li family, was given to the Dongchang clan and became the daughter of the Dongcheng clan. Bai Qingqian, who just saw her son in a hurry, almost completely collapsed. The loving couple, the filial daughter-in-law, all the beautiful relationship was completely broken at that moment. Mad One, Gad 2, Bai Qingqian and the Dongchang clan almost completely broke up, but after the initial time, Bai Qingqian, who couldn't find her son, began to gradually pay attention to Dongcheng Rushi. She hadn't returned to the Dongcheng clan in these years, but she still showed a mother's care and love for Dongcheng Rushi. Dongcheng Rushi had been in a coma for 2 years. But 2 years ago, in the more than 20 years before that, she never felt that her mother, Bai Qingqian, didn't like her. With this alone, Li Shi could be sure of Bai Qingqian's attitude toward Dongcheng Rushi over the years. Dongcheng Rushi's current situation was not very good, but Li Shi couldn't not remember the kindness of raising her for so many years. Bai Qingqian's face changed slightly, and she didn't speak. "Don't get me wrong," Li Shi whispered. "I have no intention of robbing Rushi from you. She will always be your daughter. I don't mean that." Bai Qingqian waved her hand a little awkwardly, then pulled Li Shi and laughed. "It's a little cold. Come on, let's go in and talk." Li Shi was pulled into the car by Bai Qingqian. The car started slowly. Dongcheng Wudi, who was driving in person, kept looking at Li Shi through the rearview mirror. He wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. Bai Qingqian seemed to know what her husband was thinking. She hesitated for a moment and said softly, I heard that you saw Tianlan as soon as you woke up?" "Yes." Li Shi nodded. Bai Qingqian glanced at Dongcheng Wudi, who was driving in front, and then seemed to make up her mind. She said cautiously, "What did you talk about?" As soon as she finished speaking, she opened her mouth again and said with a forced smile, "Of course, if it's something we shouldn't know. You are his parents." Li Shi whispered, "There is nothing we shouldn't know. His Majesty thinks so, too." Parents, this simplest and most common word, seemed to shatter all the defenses in Bai Qingqian's heart in an instant. Her body was stiff in the seat, and her face was pale. Li Shi lowered her eyebrows and whispered, "We talked about his and Rushi's life experiences. I told him everything I should tell him." Chapter 951. The car was moving slowly in the manor. Inside the car, there was a deathly silence that was almost frozen. Bai Qingqian looked at Li Shi's calm face in a daze and couldn't say a word for a long time. Li Tianlan's origin. This might be the only problem she worried and even feared in recent years. There was no way to describe her inner feelings. In recent years, Li Tianlan and the Dongchang clan were getting closer and closer. Bai Qingqian felt very happy, but also a little scared. She didn't know how to face the child who was gradually returning, and she didn't dare to think about how he would react after knowing his origin. Complain? Resentment? Indifference? Or something else? She thought about this question again and again. Seeing that Li Tianlan was getting closer and closer to the answer, she looked forward to the arrival of this day, and, at the same time, she was afraid of this day. She knew that Li Tianlan had noticed something. Maybe it was the clues in the past years, or the undisguised preference of the Dongchang clan and the Bai clan for him that made him notice something. But Li Tianlan didn't say it, and even occasionally showed an attitude of refusing this topic. But in addition, his attitude toward the Dongcheng clan had not changed. He called Dongcheng Wudi minister and called her aunt. He was polite and respectful, but there was no obvious alienation. Bai Qingqian felt a little distressed, but her heart gradually settled down. She thought that Li Tianlan might not be able to accept these things for a while. She thought that the time was not ripe enough, so the truth was clearly in front of them, but both sides turned a blind eye to it. Maybe in a few years, or a few more years, she would slowly tell Li Tianlan the truth in the most peaceful way, but Bai Qingqian did not expect that Li Shi would directly pierce through this layer of window paper that almost didn't exist but had great significance. Dongcheng Wudi held the steering wheel tightly and smiled silently. He couldn't blame Li Shi for anything, and Li Shi had no obligation to keep it secret for them. Besides, it seemed that there was nothing to keep secret. Bai Qingqian's confused and wandering voice sounded after a while. Well, did he say anything? No. Li Shi shook her head. He knew about this a long time ago. So, Bai Qingqian's body trembled slightly. He still won't forgive us? No. Li Shi shook her head and thought about the conversation with Li Tianlan. He didn't hate you, so there was no forgiveness. He said that neither the Li family nor the Dongchang clan had done anything wrong to him. He said that the current situation was actually very good, and there was no need to deliberately explain anything. Li Shi was silent for a while and chuckled. He is His Majesty now. Perhaps he is still very young in his 20s, and perhaps in your eyes, he is still a child. But now he is indeed one of the most powerful people in the world, and even the most powerful one. He stands at the peak of personal force. With the rapid development of Emperor Dong's palace, he also has unimaginable power and wealth. Now he can almost do whatever he wants. As long as he wants, there's nothing that he can't do or get. If he had nothing when he first appeared in Huading a few years ago, maybe we would have told him the truth, and he would have been resentful, unable to accept it, and hysterical. But now he is almost everything. What he has today is given to him by the Dongchang clan and the Li family. Standing at his height, what else can he not accept? He didn't explain it, but it doesn't mean that he didn't know it. He knew it and was still willing to deal with the Dongchang clan, which shows that he has let it go. He didn't say it because he was too lazy to entangle himself in it. At the same time, he didn't want to make you feel guilty. The way things are now is actually very good. He doesn't call you mom and dad for now, but that doesn't mean he's not their son. Li Shi suddenly thought of something and asked, "Do you know why he went to Kunlun City to bring me back?" "Why?" Dongcheng Wudi asked subconsciously. "Not because I might recover. My strength," Li Shi said slowly. "It was my own choice to join Emperor Dong's palace. He promised to help me fight with Gu Xingyun just because he said that I was also his mother." Li Shi was silent for a while and smiled with some complexity. "Mother-in-law is also a mother, right? So, thank you very much. Thank you for helping me take care of Rushi for so many years." Later, I learned that the Dongchang clan did a lot of things secretly after the collapse of the Li family. If you hadn't secretly taken action, the Li family's fate might have been worse. If you hadn't, Rushi would probably not have survived. Her voice gradually lowered, and she was lost in thought. More than 20 years ago, the Dongcheng clan was also the most influential wealthy family in Zhongzhou State. At that time, Dongcheng Hongguang was still the standing deputy minister of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State and one of the directors of the Zhongzhou State Parliament. Although there was an extra word, there was no standing minister in Zhongzhou State at that time. So Dongcheng Hongguang's position at that time was equivalent to Dongcheng Wudi's current position. He ranked third among the directors of the parliament, deeply rooted and powerful. The collapse of the Li family was too sudden. The Southeast group was in turmoil, and the Gu family struggled to rise under great pressure. The Dongxing clan took action and easily smoothed out some things secretly and concealed some truths. For example, Dongxing Rushi and Li Tianlan. For so many years, Gu Xingyun didn't even know about it. He always thought that Li Shi and Li Guangtu's daughter was dead. Maybe he was not sure about Li Tianlan's origin until now. If there was no Dongxiang clan, things would not be like this at all. Even the one Li Shi killed might really be Dongxing Rushi. How could there be the current story? Don't think that they are good people. They are also selfish. Bai Qingqian said coldly and gave Dongxing Wudi a hard look. Although the relationship between husband and wife had been eased, when it came to this topic, her inner resentment and grievance suddenly surged up. She found Dongxing Wudi unpleasant no matter how she looked at him. Dongxing Wudi coughed and drove the car. Because of his guilty conscience, the car was as slow as a turtle crawling. In the final analysis, what happened that year was actually a transaction, purely without any other purpose. The development of the Dongxiang clan had already reached a bottleneck, or the peak that they could reach. After the peak, it was bound to be a stage of continuous decline. It could be said that Dongxing Hanguang had put in a lot of effort to become the de facto leader of the army headquarters. But the giant group was different from other groups. It was a loose group that tended to be an alliance. Its internal cohesion was seriously insufficient. Many times before it did anything to the outside world, it had already felt the internal constraints. The giant group was naturally dominated by the wealthy families of Zhongzhou State. The Dongxiang, Bai, and Zhou families were the pillars. But other wealthy families had various relationships with other groups. In terms of scale, the giant group was the first among the 6 groups, but it almost never made the same voice. Dongxing Hanguang was not sure how far the Dongxiang clan would develop after his retirement. At that time, the 3 pillars of the giant group were urgently seeking changes, but they could not find any opportunities at all. The biggest problem was that there were no real experts in the Dongxiang clan, the first wealthy family in the military. At that time, the peak force of Zhongzhou State was also the peak force of the Dark World. It had been so for hundreds of years. The Li family and the Wang family of Beihai had always been the peak force of individual forces in Zhongzhou State. Even if the Dongxiang clan had cultivated a great force like Jade Pool, it could not guarantee that there would be an invincible realm expert in every generation. Even if someone was lucky enough to enter the invincible realm, he was still a little brother in front of the Li family in Beihai. Individual force often did not mean anything, but more often than not, it clearly represented something. The position of the state-protecting war god could already explain some problems. This position represented great power, but at the same time, it also represented extreme martial strength. Absolute personal strength represented absolute prestige. Today's Wang family of Beihai was a behemoth that slowly transformed into shape after the personal strength reached its peak. A real peak invincible realm expert meant strength in countless disputes. Confidence was related to a lot of invisible prestige, interest, diplomatic relations, and execution power. If the Dongxing clan had an invincible realm expert who could compete with the Li family and Beihai, the entire Dongxing clan and even the giant group would go further and become a super large group that could really be on an equal footing with the Southeast group. The collapse of the Li family gave the Dongxiang clan an opportunity. Li Honghe needed to preserve the last strength of the Li family as another trump card, and the Dongxing clan was eager to seize this opportunity to cultivate a real top expert. Jade Pool could not cultivate such an expert. The Li family was the most suitable candidate. So the deal was reached the moment the two sides met. The grandson of the Dongxiang clan became the grandson of Li Honghe and became Li Tianlan. The granddaughter of the Li family became the granddaughter of the Dongxiang clan and became Dongxing Rushi. In order to integrate in the future, the two sides used the oldest but often the most effective way: marriage. From that moment on, the baby boy and the baby boy, who were born on the same day in the same year, month, and year, had been tied up. Li Honghe had no reservations about Li Tianlan. He taught him all the inheritance of the Li family and tried his best to cultivate him. The Dongxing clan was also generous to Dongxing Rushi. Both sides regarded the two children as their own, waiting for them to grow up and get married smoothly. At that time, the power of the Li family would become the power of the Dongsheng clan. And the power of the Dongsheng clan would also be the cornerstone of the Li family's rise again. From that moment on, the Dongsheng clan and the Li family had put their futures on the two children. This was a deal. Up to now, this deal had deviated a little because of various factors, but in general, the general direction had not changed. The Li family rose again. With the rise of the Li family and the establishment of Emperor Dong's palace, the new group would also become an important turning point for the three pillars of the giant group to seek change. Among them, Bai Qingxian, who had lost her son, and Li Tianlan, who had suffered a lot since childhood, might have suffered a lot. Li Tianlan had gained something. What about Bai Qingxian? Li Shi looked at Bai Qingxian in a daze. After a long time, she reached out, held her hand, and whispered, "Thank you." Bai Qingxian shook her head. "I don't need to thank you. After all, in my heart, Rushi is also my daughter." She looked straight at Li Shi and said in a pleading voice, "If I really want to join Emperor Dong's palace, my only request is that you can help me take care of my son." Just like what he said. Li Shi said softly, "He is also my son." A son-in-law was naturally a son. Bai Qingxian bit her lip and nodded hard. "If I can, I really want to wait for Moon God to wake up and then watch them get married and watch their children." Li Shi's voice was a little faint. "Moon God?" Bai Qingxian asked. "Ah." Li Shi smiled. "This is the name that Li Kuang-tu and I gave her before she was born, Li Yueshen, but the name Rushi is also very good." "Name?" Bai Qingxian's eyes were in trance. "Tianlan also has a name, right?" Li Shi asked tentatively. Almost every parent would choose a name for their child before they were born. "Yes." Li Shi smiled bitterly. She and Dongsheng Wudi naturally gave Li Tianlan a name, but things had developed to this point. That name was almost meaningless. Li Tianlan was Li Tianlan after all. Dongsheng Wudi sighed, and his eyes flickered. No one knew what he was thinking. After a long time, he stopped the car and whispered, "We also gave him a name at that time." At that time, Qingxian was just 4 months pregnant. Shaking his head, Dongsheng Wudi said, "His name is Dongsheng Huangtu." Chapter 952. Li Shi left quietly and did not bring any extra trouble when she came back. At 11 o'clock in the morning, Li Shi, who had disappeared for a night, came back again. Li Qingcheng, who looked obviously restless, suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. Li Tianlan, who was accompanying Li Qingcheng rather than Li Qingcheng, stood up. He asked, "Are you all right?" "Yes." Li Shi glanced at him with soft eyes. "Thank you." Li Tianlan looked up at his watch and shook his head. "The route has been determined. We will return to Tianan at 2:30 p.m. Tomorrow, Emperor Dong's palace will officially announce to the public that we will welcome the third deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace." Li Shi was silent for a while and nodded slightly. "Okay, Your Majesty." Li Tianlan turned his head and glanced at Lin Yuxian, who was sitting next to Li Qingcheng. Lin Yuxian noticed his gaze but ignored it. Obviously, he didn't want to leave. This attitude made Li Tianlan angry. He was not familiar with Li Shi, let alone Li Qingcheng. But if he left now, Lin Yuxian would definitely be full of complaints. Compared with Li Tianlan, he had no reason to stay here. Li Tianlan was thinking about what new topic to talk about when someone knocked on the door suddenly. The sound of high-heeled shoes on the ground came in from outside the door. Han Xinyan held the mobile phone and said with a dignified expression, "Your Majesty, my dad, a military counselor has important information to report to you." Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly. Thinking of military counselor, who had done his best for Emperor Dong's palace but had always been aloof from him, his expression was a little strange. Han Xinyan subconsciously lowered her voice and said hurriedly, "It's very important information." Li Tianlan nodded, reached for the mobile phone, and glanced at Lin Yuxian again. Lin Yuxian stood up helplessly and planned to leave with Li Tianlan. "Child Lin, if you have nothing to do, please stay. I still have something to communicate with you." In addition, Qingsheng and I have rarely left Kunlun City in recent years, so we don't know much about the outside world, especially Xianyuan City. You could talk to us. Li Shi took the initiative to speak and looked at Lin Yuxian meaningfully. As someone who had been there, she could naturally understand Lin Yuxian's occasional look at Li Qingsheng. It was not a male's desire to conquer a female, but a very simple yearning and love. Li Shi really didn't know much about Lin Yuxian, but she had known Lin Fengting many years ago after all. With Lin Fengting's character, the children educated by him might not be saints, but it was not an exaggeration to say that he was a gentleman. Lin Yuxian himself was the best choice in terms of talent, appearance, and future. If Li Qingsheng could be with him, it could be said that it was a pretty good ending. Oh, cough. Okay. Lin Yuxian stammered for a moment and then reacted. He gently raised the corner of his mouth. Auntie, you can call me Xiaolin or Yuxian. It sounds kind. I'm not Child Lin. I will develop in Zhongzhou State in the future. I hope you can give me more advice. Han Xinyan took a dull look at the former heir of the Lin clan. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, but he didn't say anything. A real bootlicker didn't care about the situation. In the end, he would get everything he wanted. No matter what the opportunity was, he just needed to bootlick. Shaking his head, he didn't say much. He walked out of the room and dialed the military counselor's number. The military counselor picked up the call immediately. It was obvious that he was waiting on the other side of the phone. What's the matter? Li Tianlan asked directly. Your Majesty, have you seen today's news? Li Tianlan was a little confused. It's the morning news of Beijiang. Military counselor said in a dignified tone. The Beijiang Corps has begun to count the list of the families of the war dead last night. In the morning, the first batch of pensions has been issued in full. So fast, Li Tianlan was shocked. This speed could no longer be described as efficiency. With so many families of the victims, it was impossible to complete the statistics in a short period of time. Obviously, the so-called overnight statistics last night was just a pretense. The northern borderline had already begun to secretly count the families of the war dead to determine their true identities. How much is the first batch of pensions? 120 billion. Military counselor said in a deep voice. There are several more batches later. Li Tianlan frowned tightly. 120 billion. It's hard for the finance of Beijiang to come up with this money. It's not very difficult. Military counselor's tone was very certain. We also have investments in Beijiang. Although the scale is not large, it is only relatively speaking. I can be sure that the amount of cash that Beijiang's finance department can mobilize overnight is not 120 billion, not even half. This sum of money seems to have appeared out of thin air. The most important thing is that Beijiang has made a statement that the second batch of pensions of about 150 billion will be issued tomorrow, and there will be another batch the day after tomorrow. They don't seem to have considered the problem of funds at all. Are you kidding me? Li Tianlan laughed. Funds come out of nowhere? Military counselor was silent for a long time before he whispered, Your Majesty, have you ever thought that in the eyes of others, our funds often come out of nowhere? Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed slightly, and he said flatly, What do you mean? I have begun to investigate the source of the accounts in Beijiang, but there is not too much detailed information at present. However, according to the surface situation, the funds in Beijiang have nothing to do with foreign consortiums. Although some of the money does come from overseas, this money is not from foreign consortiums, but the Jiang family's own property. Your Majesty, we also have many industries overseas. This model is too similar. Military counselor was silent for a long time before he said in a low voice, I suspect that there's also a consortium similar to the Flourishing Age Fund behind the Jiang family, which is led by the Jiang family itself. In terms of scale, they may not be as large as the Flourishing Age Fund, but it is enough for them to pay this high pension. The hidden financial resources of the Jiang family should be extremely strong. Their overall strength is not as simple as we think. Li Tianlan rubbed his forehead with one hand and said slowly, It makes sense, but there is not much basis for your speculation. There's one more thing. Saint hesitated, took a deep breath, and said softly, Before the boss left last night, he asked me to remind you that you must be careful of Jiang Shangyu. The boss seems to have received reliable news that the Jiang family seems to have a super expert in a special state. His state is probably similar to yours, but not exactly the same. His combat capability should be beyond the peak of the invincible realm. At present, some indications show that this person may be Jiang Shangyu, and even the decisive battle in Beihai is behind him. Li Tianlan was obviously stunned for a while. Jiang Shangyu? He muttered to himself, and thought of Jiang Shangyu he saw yesterday. Then he shook his head and said with certainty, he is not. Even if he is not, he must have a very close relationship with Jiang Shangyu. Military counselor said, Your Majesty, in the next decisive battle in Beihai, he is very likely to be your opponent, and the boss asked me to remind you. Have you not paid attention to Li Guangtu's state for a long time? Li Tianlan fell silent. After a long while, he took a light breath and said flatly, When I go back, I will go to the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital to have a look. Chapter 953. After hanging up the call with military counselor, Li Tianlan stood where he was and kept silent for a long time. The military advisor's reminder was very timely and straightforward. Although what he said was just speculation and suspicion, the slight hesitation in his tone had an obvious sense of certainty. Military counselor almost said that there must be a super superior in the Jiang family who was in a similar state but not exactly the same as him. If it wasn't Jiang Shangyu, then it must have a very close relationship with Jiang Shangyu. It was he who integrated the power of the sanctuary, the Jiang family of South America, East Island, and Zhu. It might be an exaggeration to say integration, but the alliance between several superpowers was indeed a bit inexplicable. It was understandable that East Island went all out. Because of the Shadow Throne, the sanctuary also had a reason to intervene, but the Jiang family of South America was really messing around. As for Zhu, he had now died in Li Tianlan's hands, so there was no need to think about it. All the signs showed that there should be a key figure among these superpowers. A key figure who was extremely mysterious but had the absolute strength to suppress the superpowers. This key figure promoted the final battle of Beihai, so he was bound to have a connection with Zhongzhou State. At least, he had a connection with Wang Qinglei and Chen Fanqing. After all, Jiang Shan was a senior counselor in Zhongzhou State. The Jiang family had enough secret channels to contact Wang Qinglei and Chen Fanqing. If the mysterious super superior really existed, he undoubtedly had the power to deter and unite several superpowers. All the signs showed that the Jiang family was behind the scenes, which united the superpowers in Zhongzhou State and promoted the final battle of Beihai. Li Tianlan thought of Jiang Shangyu's palm in front of him again. Do you want to be my friend or my enemy? That sentence was calm and cautious, but with a kind of confidence that could make him feel an obvious sense of oppression. Did Jiang Shangyu's confidence come from a superior hiding in the dark? If things were really like military counselor speculation, it meant that under everyone's eyes, the Jiang family had completed the integration of its own power. East Island, Knights Templars, and the Jiang family of South America might not be the subordinates of the Jiang family, but at least they were forces that could be used. It was a combination of interests that could not be broken in a short time. Jiang Shan was controlling Beijiang in a very high-profile way. Jiang Shangyu, who acted inexplicably but behaved extremely strongly, appeared in Yuzhou. The final battle of Beihai was getting closer and closer. Everything showed that the hidden superior of the Jiang family was ready to come out in a high-profile way. This also meant that the other party had the confidence to strengthen himself. Was his goal the new situation after the decisive battle in North Sea? What would he gain from the new situation? Beihai, Beijiang, Kunlun City. Li Tianlan rubbed his forehead, his thoughts a little chaotic. It was not until this moment that he realized that the super forces of the Dark World had once faced was the feeling he had in the Samsara Palace. An enemy who was always hiding in the dark but had great strength, and an enemy who was unpredictable was enough to give anyone a headache. Your Majesty, Have you seen the news? Footsteps came from a corner, and Saint walked over. Yes, Li Tianlan said. I didn't see it, but I heard that Jiang Shangyu. He shook his head and didn't continue. Saint was silent for a moment, and then said with a self-mocking smile, Now I understand what Jiang Shangyu meant. He said that the Jiang family has no so-called backer. If they really have one, then their backer is only themselves. When did such a person appear in the Jiang family? Li Tianlan was a little confused. If this expert really exists, then who is the most likely one? No. Saint shook his head without hesitation. There is no such person. We've searched through the genealogy of the Jiang family. The most likely one is Jiang Shangyu, and only Jiang Shangyu. Except for him, there will not be a second person in the Jiang family who has this kind of strength to suppress Knights Templars, East Island, and the Jiang family of South America. Even if his combat capability is not as good as your Majesty's, he is at least at the peak of the invincible realm. Jiang Shangyu can't do it. Li Tianlan said blandly. I can't break through the invincible realm, and neither can he. It's not because of talent, but because of his body, or in other words, he's not old enough. So we think his state should be similar to that of your Majesty, but not exactly the same. Saint said, it's also impossible for him to directly become a half-step invincible realm expert overnight. No one can break through the realm so easily, but there's a way to achieve a similar effect. Go on. Li Tianlan was expressionless. It's not breaking the realm. Saint said simply, it's recovery. If we assume that Jiang Shangyu has been in a state of serious injury, he originally had the strength beyond the peak of the invincible realm, but because of the serious injury, he could only perform at the level of the thunder-shocking realm. If part of his injury recovers for some reason, then his combat capability can naturally advance by leaps and bounds, and he can step into the half-step invincible realm. And in these years, if his injury recovers again, he can perform the strength of the peak of the invincible realm or even higher. This is not impossible, and we can be sure that Jiang Shangyu has been in poor health since he was a child. If he is seriously injured, all this can be explained. How? Li Tianlan asked in reply, do you want to say that Jiang Shangyu was born to be at the peak of the invincible realm? Saint paused, opened his mouth, and couldn't say anything for a moment. He hesitated for a long time, and then said softly, Your Majesty, now is not the time to investigate the reason. The fact is in front of us. The Jiang family can almost be sure that there is a super expert, so I'll go to Beihai with you this time. At least, I can help you share some of the pressure. No need. Li Tianlan insisted a little stubbornly. You go to East Island. I can handle Beihai. What if Li Quanta goes with you? Saint's question was extremely sharp. Li Tianlan subconsciously narrowed his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. After a while, he continued, I can handle it. Saint looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and suddenly said, Your Majesty, you haven't really entered the invincible realm. Li Tianlan glanced at him and didn't say anything. I've never understood. Saint continued, If you don't enter the invincible realm, no matter how powerful you are, there should be a limit. But your Majesty, your combat capability has almost exceeded all limits. The only explanation is that your sword intent is perfect and it should have really reached the supreme height. But sword intent can't replace everything. The most realistic point is that at your current age, under normal circumstances, you can only support the power of the thunder-shocking realm. At most, you can only have the combat capability of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan gave a nonchalant and made no comment. But your actual combat capability now has steadily surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. This is not the power that your physical quality can bear, and you shouldn't be able to exert the sword energy that can match this power and the perfect sword intent. So, Saint looked at Li Tianlan deeply. There must be a reason. Li Tianlan didn't say anything. I've thought about it for a long time. If I'm right, the reason why you could be truly invincible now is not because of your physical quality, right? Your real combat capability should still be the combat capability of the invincible realm. But in the real outbreak state, You can cause damage that is infinitely close to that of the Chosen One in an instant or in a short time. Such an outbreak has a price. Your body didn't collapse, so the only explanation is, in that state, every time you attack, every sword, it consumes your vitality. Saint's tone was low. Is it your own lifespan? This should be your biggest secret now, right? Li Tianlan suddenly fell silent. I have to go to Beihai, Saint said in a deep voice. Even if I can't do too much, I can't watch you being besieged by the expert of the Jiang family and Li Kuang too. Their strength is not much different from yours in the extreme state. Who said I would be besieged? Li Tianlan said blandly. Saint looked at Li Tianlan in astonishment. Li Tianlan smiled and his eyes flickered. It's been more than 2 years. Do you really think that the current Beihai, or the current Wang Tianzong, has no power to fight back at all? Chapter 954. At that moment, it was as if he had suddenly heard a huge nightmare or a disaster. Saint's body suddenly trembled. He looked straight at Li Tianlan and said in a hoarse voice, Wang Tianzong. He was destined to be a figure that would not be forgotten in a short time. But he was also a figure that was rarely mentioned in the past 2 years. He was invincible in the world. He shocked the world and was supreme. The peak of the Wang family of Beihai and Wang Tianzong's personal glory were so short. At the moment when he was really supreme, the eternal sword above Mormons directly ended everything. That was the real day of the end. It had only been less than 2 years since the chaos in Mormons, but when it was mentioned at this time, it seemed to be really a thing of the last era. Saint's heart was in turmoil, and he couldn't calm down at all. Although he didn't want to admit it, he had to admit that Wang Tianzong, who appeared to Mormons that day, was enough to be a nightmare for most people in the dark world, including Lin Fengting, Li Kuang Tu, and naturally Saint. He was now in the invincible realm and was a top expert in the dark world. But compared with Wang Tianzong at that time, he was really insignificant. That was the Real Supreme, the peak of the dark world for hundreds of years or even longer. He was brilliant and invincible. Perhaps except for Li Tianlan, no one could treat Wang Tianzong equally in that state. What was Wang Tianzong's current state? After more than 2 years of silence, did he recover some strength so quickly? It was like a shadow that once existed had once again covered the sky. Saint's heart was a little cold, and even his tone became a little cold. It can't be so fast. It's absolutely impossible. Why are you excited? Li Tianlan glanced at him. Saint opened his mouth and didn't know what to say to express his emotions. After a long time, he said with a bitter smile, Your Majesty, why do you think that the Sword Emperor has recovered? He hasn't fully recovered yet, but he's still a supreme genius after all. After such a long time, it's impossible for him to not have any tricks up his sleeves and allow himself to be trampled on. Li Tianlan shook his head and said, The Wang family of Beihai is too confident. I can't tell what I feel. In the game between Beihai and Zhongzhou State, at the beginning, Beihai could be said to have made concessions step by step. But I don't know when it started. There is no specific time, but the whole of Beihai suddenly became tough. For example, Wang Shengxiao's speech to the whole of Beihai and the large-scale conscription of the Beihai Corps. It was precisely because this attitude was beyond Chen Fangqing's expectations that he felt that many things were out of his control. That was why his actions became more and more radical, and, in the end, he pushed forward the termination plan. All of this seems to have been deliberately guided. If I'm not mistaken, Wang Tianzong's state has changed before and after that speech. I don't know what the specific changes are, but at that realm, his recovery ability may not be much worse than his combat capability. You reminded me to pay attention to Li Kuang Tu's condition. Li Kuang Tu might get better. Why can't Wang Tianzong do the same? It's not the same thing. Saint smiled bitterly and said, Li Kuang Tu's injury is far less serious than Wang Tianzong's. We all know the power of that sword. Wang Tianzong is lucky not to die. In our estimation, the most optimistic result is that Wang Tianzong can't recover within 10 years. It's only been 2 years, so it should be impossible. Li Tianlan shook his head slightly and said nothing. What he said just now was all speculation, but what really made him sure that Wang Tianzong's state was gradually recovering was actually the information about Carefree that Lin Yuxian told him. Carefree might be able to suppress Ruthless in a certain state, but when no one in the whole of Beihai could be sure of his current state, why did Wang Shengxiao dare to attack Ruthless? Because of Carefree? But in this case, it looked like a big gamble. The Wang family of Beihai was indeed crazy, but at this stage, they couldn't afford to gamble at all. So the only answer was that the Wang family of Beihai didn't care about his state. Even if his current state could suppress and devour Ruthless Carefree, the Wang family of Beihai wouldn't care. The only reason that could make Wang Shengxiao so confident, apart from the so-called compensation, was Wang Tianzong. I have a hunch. Li Tianlan chuckled. The final battle in Beihai this time will definitely give everyone a huge surprise. If that's the case, Saint hesitated for a moment. If that's the case, it's most appropriate for me to go by myself. Li Tianlan said blandly. At the very least, even if it's impossible, I can at least guarantee that I can escape unscathed. Even if Wang Tianzong has recovered a little, as long as he's not at his peak, there's nothing to worry about. The mysterious expert of the Jiang family, Li Kuangtu, several invincible realm experts. It sounds scary, but at the very least, even if I can't beat them, no one can stop me if I want to leave. If you guys go, maybe it'll be a different situation. Let's go back to Tianan today. I'll call Du Hanin and Su Chu who are in Beihai to come back. Emperor Dong's palace will concentrate all its forces to East Island, and I'll go to Beihai by myself. This is the safest way. The corner of Saint's mouth twitched, and he said with a helpless and bitter smile, Safe. Okay, safe. He hesitated for a moment and said in a low voice, But your current state, your guess is right. If I want to maintain the extreme state now, what I squander is indeed vitality. My physical strength is currently unable to bear the absolute power and sword energy, so I can only overdraw. From this point of view, before I make a sword move in the extreme state, I first hurt my body, so I need a lot of vitality to make up for the injury. It's not wrong to say that I overdraw my life. Li Tianlan's voice was very calm. But in fact, the impact on me is not as serious as you think. The huge vitality of the dragon vein of Zhongzhou state may not be able to completely support my unscrupulous waste. But don't forget, compare with the martial arts direction of the Wang family of Beihai's extreme outbreak. What's the best thing about the Li family's martial arts? The Li family's strongest thing was the sword. The Wang family of Beihai's strongest thing was also the sword. The strongest thing of the two was the sword, but the direction was not the same. The martial arts direction of Beihai was extreme outbreak, and the Li family, its extreme balance. Li Tianlan said calmly, So at present, I can maintain this state. There will be an impact, but it won't be very big. Maybe I sleep longer, eat more, and need more rest and adequate nutrition. As for the follow-up impact, it will probably be reflected in a few decades. But after a few decades, my physical strength will be enough to support me to enter a higher realm. So all these problems are not very big. But Saint hesitated for a moment and used honorifics again. You don't have the body of the invincible realm yet. No matter how balanced you are, it should be difficult to control the power beyond the peak of the invincible realm. You're wrong. Li Tianlan's tone was normal. At least so far, the power I have exerted has not surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. Chapter 955. There was a dim light in the underground base, which was so simple that it could even be said to have been picked up by others. On the surface, it was a bare mountain forest at the border of southern cloud and southern sky. The underground base was built in a hurry. In order to hide it, it was dug very deep, so the ventilation was not very good. The air was stuffy, with a hint of a faintly discernible stench. There were no extra staff. One of them used to be a gatekeeper of the base after retiring from scientific research, and the other was an apprentice of the gatekeeper. In addition to the master and apprentice, there was only a set of outdated life support equipment left in the base. What is this? Jiang Shangyu looked at the extremely old equipment in front of him with a look of disgust. His Majesty's eyes were also full of disgust, which was exactly the same as Jiang Shangyu's. But his expression was a little helpless. I'll make do with it. I hate the feeling of becoming a fool. Jiang Shangyu complained and said with a little pain in the ass, I feel sick when I think about it. His Majesty did not speak. He thought that even if he became a fool, it would happen after he came out of this set of equipment. What are you thinking about? Jiang Shangyu looked at him and raised his eyebrows. Don't you know what I'm thinking? His Majesty asked in reply and turned on the life support equipment in front of him. The equipment was a little outdated. It looked old and even a little dirty, but the inside was very clean. His Majesty pressed the button, and the sound of the equipment running rang out. The small cabin in front of them began to be filled with a black liquid. The liquid was increasing, and it looked like a piece of almost solidified darkness. His Majesty, suddenly retched, turned to look at Jiang Shangyu and said helplessly, What are you doing? Cut the crap. Jiang Shangyu resisted the desire to vomit, and his face was stiff. It's really nonsense, His Majesty murmured to himself. The distance between them was too close. When they stood together, not only did they know what each other was thinking, but they even felt the same. But if you don't talk, doesn't it look strange? Jiang Shangyu snorted, and his face became more and more ugly. Your willpower is too poor. This degree of sleep will make people uncomfortable, but it's nothing. And this time, it won't be long. Cut the crap. Jiang Shangyu glared at His Majesty and said angrily, You do it if you can. His Majesty nodded seriously and repeated, If you can do it, then go ahead. Jiang Shangyu paused. After a while, he gritted his teeth and said, Now I want to kill you. If you can do it, then go ahead. Of course, His Majesty could sleep at this level. But then he had to fight Li Tianlan alone. Jiang Shangyu really couldn't do this kind of thing. There's been some progress in the laboratory. We will strive to develop the second generation of nutrient solution so that it won't be as disgusting as it is now. His Majesty said slowly, As for this base, it's really a little shabby, but we don't have much power here, so we can only make do. 3 days later, after the battle between me and Li Tianlan is over, you will be transferred to East Island as soon as possible. His Majesty was silent for a moment and said softly, If there are no accidents after the Battle of the North Sea, it won't matter much whether or not we have new nutrient fluids. Jiang Shangyu looked at the thicker and thicker black liquid in the cockpit and took a deep breath subconsciously. The development of the Jiang family in this respect was completely different from that of the Wang family of Beihai. They couldn't be compared at all. Whether it was the foundation or the technology, they weren't at the same level. So naturally, the things they developed couldn't be perfect. This black nutrient solution could be said to be one of the most important things of the Jiang family now, codenamed Eternal Seal. This liquid, which was almost in a solid state, was the product of the Jiang family's targeted research for many years. It was also a drug specially developed for Jiang Shangyu and His Majesty. When Jiang Shangyu was dormant in the cabin, under the penetration of the Eternal Seal, the sensitivity of his body would be greatly reduced, forming a state similar to that of a vegetative person. The perfect combination of various drugs greatly strengthened his body when it was extremely slow. He and His Majesty were the same person. This kind of phenomenon that science couldn't explain would naturally have some facts that science couldn't explain. For example, the two people's thoughts could be synchronized within a certain distance. Another example was that within a certain distance, His Majesty could transfer a lot of the damage he suffered to Jiang Shangyu, who was temporarily sealed. In the same way, when Jiang Shangyu was asleep, his physical strength was greatly improved. His Majesty could also overdraft his body to suppress the toxins in his body, so as to exert the power close to the peak state. He and Jiang Shangyu were the same person, but from this point of view, it was equivalent to two individuals. His Majesty didn't know the result of the battle between him and Li Tianlan, but as long as Jiang Shangyu was asleep, he was invincible. After all, Jiang Shangyu had no poison in his body. Without poison, in a nutrient solution codenamed Eternal Seal, His physical strength was completely comparable to that of the peak of the invincible realm. In addition, with His Majesty's own physical strength, the two could bear his strength and the damage at the same time. It could almost easily break through the boundary of the peak of the invincible realm. This thing is so beautiful. His Majesty looked at the black liquid in the cockpit with some disgust, and his tone was a little emotional. After countless experiments and countless improvements, this was already the best result he could get. The only drawback was that Jiang Shangyu's body and mind would also be in an extremely slow state for a short period of time after he ended his sleep. His external performance was like an idiot, but in the state of sleep, the Eternal Seal could directly improve a person's physical endurance from the half-step invincible realm to the peak of the invincible realm. It was definitely a well-deserved masterpiece. This kind of masterpiece couldn't play any role in the hands of others, but in the hands of Jiang Shangyu and His Majesty, it was a real divine weapon. It was no exaggeration to say that before the poison of vermilion bird blood and black tortoise blood was solved, how powerful His Majesty could exert completely depended on the physical strength of Jiang Shangyu in the state of sleep. The laboratory of the Jiang family had never given up the study of the Eternal Seal. At present, there had been some results. The expected result of the second generation of the Eternal Seal was that the physical strength of Jiang Shangyu in the state of sleep could break through the peak of the invincible realm. If this idea could succeed, His Majesty would exert the real combat capability at the peak state. I didn't imagine it, Jiang Shangyu said directly. This sentence was a bit brainless, but at this moment, he completely felt the problem in His Majesty's heart. Just like many years ago, no one could imagine what the Dark World would be without the Leaf family. Now the two of them had never imagined what the Dark World would be without Dongqing Huangtu / Li Tianluan. That kind of dark world, His Majesty was silent for a long time before he whispered, that may not be what we want, but we can all be sure that we can get what we want in that kind of dark world. Jiang Shangyu nodded and said, that's enough. There was a dull roar in the cockpit. All the equipment was started. Jiang Shangyu turned to look at His Majesty and reached out his palm. Goodbye. Goodbye. His Majesty held his hand and said, go to sleep. When you wake up and meet again, we will be His Majesty in the dark world. Chapter 956. More than 2 years ago, or in the past many years, when Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Zhongzhou State was healthy, every time he came to Yuzhou, as long as the itinerary was clear, a director would come pick him up. There was no accident. Every time Wang Tianzong was picked up, it was the director of the Southeast Group. Only once, the president came in person, but it was still the director of the Southeast Group who came with the president. A long time ago, when Li Beitian gossiped with him about this, he sighed with emotion and said that this was the F*** card. Li Tianluan didn't quite understand it at that time. He just felt that it was meaningless to do so. It seemed to be useless except for showing off. It had been a few years since that conversation. Now Li Tianluan, who also had the same treatment, also understood the meaning of doing so. This was the second time he left Yuzhou since he was called His Majesty. The last time he returned to Xinyuan City, it was Zhou Mulin, the director of the giant group, who sent him off. This time, it was Dongqing Wudi who sent him back to Xinyuan City. This was also a small detail that Zhongzhou State and Emperor Dong's palace jointly maintained the stability of Zhongzhou State. Although such a farewell was of high standard, it would not be reported by the news, but people who should know would know. This meant that Emperor Dong's palace and the group controlled by it were still under the control of Zhongzhou State. The relationship between the two sides was still stable, and Emperor Dong's palace was also under the leadership of the parliament. It was a very simple signal, but an essential one. Gradually, Li Tianluan began to enjoy the treatment that Wang Tianzong had. In the conference room of the Hidden Dragon Sea, he could sit opposite Li Huaqing. When entering and leaving Yuzhou, the director would personally pick him up. Similarly, in the past many years, every time Wang Tianzong was in Yuzhou, countless modern super firepower of Zhongzhou State would secretly aim at Beihai. Now, when Li Tianluan was in Yuzhou, countless weapons were also aimed at Xinyuan City. The subtlety of this was the real relationship between super forces like Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai and Zhongzhou state. It's good to leave today. The comrade from the Meteorological Bureau said that there will be a heavy snowstorm tonight, and it is estimated that all flights will be delayed tomorrow. Yuzhou has been very busy recently, and your identity is very sensitive now. It is not good for you to stay in Yuzhou for a long time. In the cold wind in the afternoon, the sky above Yuzhou Airport was slightly gloomy. The plane was doing the last check before takeoff. Dong Xingwudi stood in the cold wind and said in a calm tone, patting Li Tianlan's shoulder, "It's not good for the parliament, is it?" Li Tianlan laughed. Wang Tianzong seldom came to Yuzhou before. If there were no accidents, Li Tianlan would have fewer chances to come here in the future. It was not because it was a forbidden place, but because different identities represented different meanings. He was now Emperor Dong Wang, and the new group had already taken shape. The giant group was fully supporting Li Tianlan to let him stand at the real peak, which also meant that there were few things he could not solve. It would be fine if he came to Yuzhou in private, but if he came with great fanfare, some people would inevitably think that he had something to communicate and negotiate with the parliament in private. No matter what it was, not many people would know. In this way, the longer he stayed in Yuzhou, the more uneasy the outside world would be. They would think that there were some unsolvable conflicts between Emperor Dong's palace and the parliament that needed Li Tianlan to waste time here. Even if he came here for nothing, just like this time, he didn't meet with Li Huaqing at all. But the outside world didn't know about it. It was impossible for the parliament to issue a statement saying that he came here for nothing and told everyone not to think too much. That would be too weak. It's the same for you, Dong Xingwudi said in a low voice, and his serious expression softened a little. Your identity is different now. You represent more than yourself. You must think more about what happens in the future. Heavenly Son, His Majesty, Leader. How nice it sounds. But how could it be so easy to do? Take Wang Tianzong, for example. He seemed to be well off these years, but only he knew the pressure he was under. He was probably out of breath. But he was angry, wasn't he? In fact, if they had restrained themselves over the years and restrained themselves in some things, how could there be such a situation today? The nature of Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai are the same. Studying them can save you a lot of detours. In your current position, you could do anything you want, but there is not much you can really do. Slowly, you will understand that when a person can really be unscrupulous, that is when he really has nothing. Emperor Dong's palace and the two groups have power over the court and are as rich as a country. But behind them are the fate of countless people. I hope you can feel their real weight. To bear these, you need more than force. You also need prudence. Li Tianlan slowly put out the cigarette in his hand and gently flicked his fingers. Subtle, sword energy flew out of his fingers and instantly broke the cigarette into powder invisible to the naked eye. His smile faded and he nodded slightly. I'm a little long-winded. Dong Xingwudi laughed at himself and said, in short, you can rest assured about the affairs in Yuzhou. Although we are old guys, none of us is willing to admit our age. We can handle things here for you. Tianlan, my only hope is that when you stand at the top and look at the world, you must not forget the cliff under your feet because of the beautiful mountains and rivers in front of you. I did some ridiculous things in my early years. Today, it seems that the result is good. Over the years, I have regretted it many times. But if I ask myself if I can do it again, even if I know I will regret it, I will do it. But I will regret it eventually. Dong Xingwudi's eyes were a little complicated. He looked at the young man in front of him quietly. Dong Wang of the Dark World, the young majesty of Zhongzhou State, the current leader of the Li family, the young giant who stood at the top of the world in his early 20s. His own son. Dong Xingwudi patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder heavily. It seemed that he wanted to hide the sudden panic and uneasiness in his heart. He turned his head slightly and said hoarsely, no matter what happens in the future, it's good to be safe and alive. Li Tianlan took a deep look at him. It's a little strange. After thinking for a while, he said softly. Dong Xingwudi's body stiffened. In my memory, no one seems to have said this to me. Since I was a child, Grandpa has always asked me to rush to the highest place. Li Tianlan said softly. When I got to this position, Grandpa was gone. If he was still there, maybe he should have advised me to be cautious. I like this feeling very much. I will also remember these words. In fact, there's no need to regret anything, really. Since I was a child, I have thought that I have nothing to lose, so even today, I have never thought about what I have lost. What I see is what I have gained. The Li family is mine, and Emperor Dong's palace is mine. It's a little late, more than 20 years late, but now I have a father and a mother. Li Tianlan's smile was clear without any resentment or dissatisfaction. Now that I have parents, I don't want to lose you. The plane was ready to take off. Li Tianlan took a step forward and hugged Dong Xingwudi, who was a little stiff. Take care of yourself, he whispered. If I have time, I will go to Zhongyuan to see you. Let's go. He waved his hand and strode onto the plane. After a short wait, the plane slowly entered the runway. It started, sprinted, rushed into the sky, and went further and further away. Dong Xingwudi had been standing there and watching, just watching all the time. When he finished the 6th cup of coffee, he, who had been sitting quietly in the cafe all afternoon, ate the last piece of cake. He narrowed his eyes and saw the helicopter roaring overhead. It went over and approached the nearby, majestic castle like a mountain. He watched silently, watching the helicopter descend and disappear from his sight, and finally smiled softly. Waiter, he called out calmly. Sir, what can I do for you? A young, dark-skinned waiter in uniform walked over and said respectfully, I need a pen and a blank sheet of paper, he said softly. The waiter was stunned, handed him the ballpoint pen with both hands, said, wait a minute, and turned to take a blank notebook from the backstage. He said, thank you, tore a blank sheet of paper from the notebook, and handed it to the waiter with a tip of 100 Zhongzhou dollars. He said with a smile, one sheet is enough. I'm very satisfied with your service. Without waiting for the waiter to respond, he had picked up the pen, lowered his head, and seemed to be thinking about what to write. The waiter left without a sound. The ballpoint pen in his hand began to slide on the white paper and quickly turned into 2 simple lines of small characters. He put down the ballpoint pen, looked at the content on the paper, and shook his head slightly. I wanted to write something pretentious. My literary talent is too poor. He, who seemed to be shrouded in a starry cloud, sighed, stood up, and turned to look at the huge castle standing under the sky not far away. The sun was about to set in Xianyuan City. He shook his head regretfully after making sure that he really couldn't write a mighty and domineering letter of challenge. The setting sun fell. The lights were on. At the moment when day and night alternated, he flicked his fingers casually. With a faint sound, the piece of paper in his hand that had been torn somewhat neatly disappeared in an instant. Boom! In an instant, a small half of Xianyuan City heard an extremely violent thunder. On the lawn in front of the castle, Li Tianlan, who had taken the plane from Yuzhou to Nanyuan and then back to Xianyuan City, suddenly looked back the moment he got off the plane. In his sight, the sky seemed to darken in an instant. The lights of Xianyuan City shone and refracted in the darkness. Outside Emperor Dong's palace, a solidified domain that Li Tianlan had never seen before took shape in the blink of an eye. The violent domain swallowed all the light and turned into an exaggerated whirlpool of thousands of meters in the distant sky. The whirlpool was expanding rapidly, covering the entire Emperor Dong's palace in an instant. At this moment, everyone in Emperor Dong's palace subconsciously raised their heads and looked at the sky. As far as the eye could see, the sky had been completely distorted by the majestic domain. The space was shaking wildly. Under the absolute pressure, a white light rushed from the whirlpool to Li Tianlan unhurriedly. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed slightly. At first glance, he saw that it was a piece of white paper. The most ordinary piece of white paper. The white paper flew all the way from thousands of meters away and accelerated wildly in the domain that distorted the sky. Like a meteor, it directly crashed into Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan, who was expressionless, stretched out his hand. The meteor directly crashed into Li Tianlan's hand. It was completely silent. The domain that covered thousands of meters in the sky suddenly disappeared. Li Tianlan's arm shook. Saint and Lin Yuxian, who were beside him, were directly retreated by a huge force at the same time, and their bodies were unstable. Li Tianlan was motionless, looking down at the white paper in his hand quietly. The white paper that flew thousands of meters did not deform at all. It was neat and tidy. The handwriting on the white paper was extremely clear and straightforward. You didn't choose to be our friend. Then we are enemies. 3 days later, in Emperor Dong's palace, we will fight to the death. Li Tianlan gently rubbed the paper with his fingers, narrowed his eyes, and did not speak for a long time. Chapter 9:57. The raging sky quieted down without a sound. The sky was still black, but the night returned to its beauty and tranquility. The extremely fast moment just now was like an illusion that everyone had experienced. The only difference was that there was a piece of white paper in Li Tianlan's hand. Li Tianlan lowered his head and looked at it silently. This letter of challenge was not formal, and the wording was very casual, but the way it was delivered was shocking. Only a true expert would be able to determine how terrifying that moment was. Your Majesty, this is Saint, who was knocked back nearly 10 meters by the huge impact, walked over slowly. He glanced at the content of the white paper, and his face was extremely serious. A letter of challenge. Li Tianlan looked calm. He loosened his palm casually, and the letter of challenge fell from his hand. Before it fell to the ground, it had been broken into countless pieces. This person, Saint frowned tightly and muttered to himself. This person is a little interesting, Li Tianlan said casually. If I'm not mistaken, this should be the hidden master of the Jiang family. I was sure of his identity after reading the content of the letter of challenge. Because the night Jiang Shangyu went to the sanatorium, he asked me whether I would choose to be his friend or enemy. He walked slowly to the castle and said slowly, I just got off the plane and the letter of challenge came. It's really fast. Your Majesty, the strength of the other party is not at the peak of the invincible realm. Saint, who was by his side, said word by word. He was also in the invincible realm. Although his realm had not been completely stabilized, if he was at the peak of the invincible realm, he would not have been directly swept away by the aftermath of a letter of challenge. No matter how big the gap between the peak of the invincible realm and the ordinary invincible realm was, it could not be so big. With only a letter, he drove the area thousands of meters above Emperor Dong's palace. This kind of strength had completely broken through the limit of the peak of the invincible realm. Yes, Li Tianlan nodded and said, the information collected by military counselor is right. The other party can be said to be one of the strongest masters I have ever met. If we only talk about the masters in the field, he is the strongest. Li Tianlan had seen many masters. Wang Tianzong, who was supreme in Kendo, Lin Fengting, and Li Kuangtu, who were also in the field of Kendo. Together with himself, there was no doubt that he was the representative figure of Kendo in that era. Domain-type expert, he had seen many of them and even killed a few, such as Jiang Qinyan and Jiang Qiansong of the Jiang family of South America, Casrotter and Moraid, the former god of war of Star State, Paul of the Shadow Throne, and Gu Xingyun sword formation. He had seen many similar experts, but he had never felt that any of them could represent the martial arts of this era. Until today, until just now, the domain that appeared and disappeared in an instant had become unbelievably sturdy. In a sense, it was no longer a domain, but a world. He had completely integrated his domain with heaven and earth, achieving the oneness of heaven and man. If he fought in this kind of domain, he could make himself unaffected, but it was also difficult for him to break such a domain in a short time. Li Tianlan could roughly determine the opponent's realm and combat capability, but he hadn't had the experience of fighting with a similar opponent. The momentum of the domain just now was amazing, but the domain dissipated too fast. The opponent still hid many things that he didn't want him to see. The only thing Li Tianlan could be sure of was that it was relative to the domain of the peak invincible realm, similar to Gu Xingyun's after breaking through the peak invincible realm. There had been some unexpected changes in the powerful domain. The opponent was indeed a somewhat tricky opponent. "Your Majesty, do you want to accept this challenge?" Saint asked in a low voice. "I have no possibility of refusing," Li Tianlan said calmly. He was Dongwang now. He was His Majesty. He was invincible in the world. He was the chosen one of this era. In this position and this height, it was impossible for him to retreat even a little. He had to accept this challenge. Even if he retreated a little, he would be regarded as cowardice by outsiders. Anyway, we will meet in the final battle in Beihai. Compared with seeing through the opponent's details at that time, it is undoubtedly better to see the opponent's means 3 days later. Li Tianlan paused and said slowly, "Besides, I think after tonight, the whole dark world will know that someone will challenge me 3 days later. I have put myself in such a high position. It is easier said than done to come down." Saint wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, stood in front of the castle gate, and glanced at the surrounding night sky. Countless sword qis suddenly shot out in all directions with him as the center. The sword light was majestic and wanton, flying like a waterfall. The awe-inspiring sword light rushed out of Emperor Dong's palace in an instant and rushed through the street outside Emperor Dong's palace. At this moment, within the range of the sword energy, because everyone's state appeared clearly in Li Tianlan's perception. Most people behaved normally, but they felt that the surrounding temperature seemed to suddenly become a little colder. In different directions, there were also a few people who were pale and didn't dare to move, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth, and his awe-inspiring voice almost rang through the whole city. "Get out of here! Do investigation tonight." Li Tianlan glanced at Saint and said, "Drive out some people who were suspected to be from other forces." "Okay." Saint nodded expressionlessly. As a new force and city, some mechanisms of Xianyuan City and Emperor Dong's palace were not perfect. Naturally, other forces in the dark world would not let go of the opportunity. In Xianyuan City, there were songs and dances, but there were always undercurrents around Emperor Dong's palace. No one knew how many pairs of eyes were secretly watching every move of Emperor Dong's palace. Before, Emperor Dong's palace didn't care about these things at all. For more than 2 years, there was nothing shameful about their every move. Occasionally, when they went too far, Li Beitian and Lin Yuxian would circle around and kill a few people, but they didn't kill them all. The existence of these people let them publicize some things, which was tantamount to improving the prestige of Emperor Dong's palace. Now that Li Tianlan was back, it could be said that Emperor Dong's palace really started to operate to create a dynasty in the dark world. Naturally, Li Tianlan would not allow some rats hiding in the dark with bad intentions around him. The only way was naturally to kill them all. Li Tianlan looked at the huge castle in front of him and suddenly shook his head. "I won't go in." His eyes paused on Li Shi, and he seemed to be a little hesitant. Li Shi seemed to understand something and said slowly, "Let me walk with you?" "No need." Li Tianlan smiled and shook his head. "It's not necessary." "Your Majesty," Saint said, "arrange their accommodations." Li Tianlan said blandly, "I'll go to Heaven Capital to have a look." After a pause, he said lightly, "My Heaven Capital." His body flickered slightly. A dazzling sword light suddenly rushed up in Emperor Dong's palace. The shining sword light cut through the night, disappeared in an instant, and rushed directly to the south. Heaven Capital in Tiannan. That was the current headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Chapter 958. Before the rise of Emperor Dong's palace, Tiannan had been peaceful for more than 2 years. And it was foreseeable that even if Li Tianlan had returned to Xianyuan City and Emperor Dong's palace were still in the initial stage of accumulation. Emperor Dong's unimaginable wealth needed to be digested slowly. Mount Shu, Sai City, Jade Pool, and the most complicated flourishing age fund and Samsara Palace also needed to be integrated slowly. The young people of Emperor Dong's palace also needed time to grow up. These things looked complicated, but in fact they were not so messy. Situ, Sanyue, Dongqing Wudi, and Qin Weibai were here. Most importantly, Li Tianlan was here. This also meant that the integration process of various forces by Emperor Dong's palace might be complicated, but there would be no trouble or undercurrents. What Emperor Dong needed most now was time. Time to slowly digest these results. Judging from the assets and hidden resources of several superpowers, Emperor Dong didn't need to expand at all. As long as he digested the forces of Sai City, Mount Shu, Jade Pool, and Samsara Palace, with the establishment of the new group, Emperor Dong could already become one of the largest superpowers in Zhongzhou State and even the whole Dark World. In other words, it was more beneficial for Emperor Dong's palace to keep a low profile than to expand in a high profile. Everyone could see this clearly. Naturally, Li Tianlan could understand it as well. So everyone could be sure that at least for the time being, the development of Emperor Dong's palace might not directly affect the pattern of Tianan. Before Emperor Dong's palace was truly integrated, the young Emperor Dong would not rush to rule Tianan, because he needed time. This was indeed a simple matter of time for Emperor Dong's palace. But for other forces in Tianan, as long as the day when Emperor Dong completely ruled Tianan did not come, they still had a chance to turn the tables. No one could see where the opportunity was for the time being, but no one would deny that it did not exist either. Think optimistically. What if Emperor Dong died one day? After all, the Supreme Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State could be killed by a sword. The growing heavenly sun might not be without accidents. Without Emperor Dong's palace, Tianan was still their Tianan, a Tianan that became richer and even madder because of the existence of Emperor Dong. Over the past 2 years, Tianan had experienced occasional turbulence in the dark, but most of the time it had been calm. Emperor Dong's palace had risen around them, and Li Tianlan had returned. So far, no force had withdrawn from Tianan. Everyone was thinking about how to destroy Emperor Dong's palace and divide its property, but no one took any action. Calm. It was calm and peaceful. In the southernmost part of Tianan, the 2 cities controlled by the Burning Legion were very calm. In the northernmost part of Tianan, Ningbian City, which was occupied by the Freedom Corps, had begun to secretly prepare to merge with Xianyuan City. The 2 cities were equally harmonious. Freedom City, which was located in the middle of Tianan, was a city where countless forces in the dark world gathered. It was a little chaotic, but it was only relatively speaking. Each force was more controlled, and there were no large-scale conflicts. Sky Capital City, which was at the same level as Liberty City, was even more stable and silent. More than 2 years ago, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital gradually withdrew from East Island, took root in Tianan, and renamed the city Sky Capital City. The forces of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital gradually gathered, drove out all the other forces in the city, and began to keep a low profile as their headquarters. Today, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital still had a lot of forces in East Island, but it was far from what it was 2 years ago. Its headquarters was in Tianan, and instead of returning to Zhongzhou State, it also left East Island. Such an action made both Zhongzhou State and East Island dissatisfied, but didn't touch the bottom line of either side. From a national point of view, both Zhongzhou State and East Island hoped to make Li Kuang-tu a super combat force and a huge force of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, a part of them. 2 years was not a long time, and both sides were still waiting for Li Kuang-tu's choice. Sky Capital City was quiet and depressing at night. Compared with the rapidly developing Xianyuan City, the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in Tianan did not invest too much. When this place was not called Tianan, but belonged to Annan State, it was not a developed area in the relatively backward Annan State, and its development was extremely backward. Although it was called a city, a county, or even a more developed town in Zhongzhou State looked more prosperous than this place. Li Kuang-tu changed the name of the city, but he basically didn't change the facilities here. The magnificent sky-reaching pavilion that once appeared in East Island's Heaven Capital was gone forever. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital delineated an area in the center of the new Sky Capital City, and the plan was done casually. It was simple and pragmatic, striving to be safe and airtight, without any luxury. The headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was located in an area about half the size of a small town in the city center. Only the elites of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital could go in and out of the headquarters area freely, and no forces and civilians were allowed to approach. In fact, there were very few other forces and civilians here. The major forces would not give up their attention to the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. But as the chaos in Snow Country grew longer and longer, people became more and more uncertain about Li Kuang-tu's state. After daybreak entered the invincible realm, almost no one came to Heaven Capital to attack. The most important thing was that this was not Xianyuan City, and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital had almost no investment here, so there was not much value in plotting. Now, the personnel of other forces who stayed here were very complete, but they were also very few. Each organization basically had only one or two people staying here to monitor the situation of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. As for civilians, there were even fewer here. When this place still belonged to Tiannan, it was a relatively lively city compared to Ningbian and Tunan. The permanent population was also more than that of the two cities in the north, about 200,000 people. As this area was named Tiannan, a considerable number of people fled back to Annan, and some went to the area controlled by the Burning Legion. When Xianyuan City was officially established and developed more than 2 years ago, most of the people who stayed here went to Xianyuan City. They were destined to have a hard time getting the right to live in Xianyuan City. But it was a city that was developing and expanding all the time, and there was no lack of resources and money. So they thought that there were enough job opportunities there, and at least they could eat their fill. The remaining small number of people went to Freedom City. Compared to the lifeless Sky Capital City, which had no desire to develop and had forcibly seized a large amount of land and food, Freedom City, where the major forces were in conflict with each other, had the opportunity to eat their fill compared to Sky Capital City. As a result, Heaven Capital was even more desolate. According to rough statistics, there were only about 40,000 people in Heaven Capital, of which nearly 30,000 belonged to the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, and nearly 3,000 had now become the peripheral force of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The rest were basically people who had nowhere to go or had no nostalgia for life. Vagrants, gamblers, drunkards, drug addicts, prostitutes. These people wandered around the periphery of Heaven Capital like walking corpses. Overall, the whole Heaven Capital was like a city with a lifeless interior and a city full of negative emotions outside. Corruption, depravity, madness, greed, ugliness, darkness outside the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. There seemed to be strong negative energy all the time. But Phoenix still liked to hear. These 2 years were the happiest time of her life. She was pregnant and had a child. She was a little weak, but she would still often accompany her. Her man and child were growing up little by little. The situation was slowly stabilizing, and the atmosphere was gradually calming. Every day, here was the happiest time for her. She liked Li Kuang-tu for many, many years. In order to follow in Li Kuang-tu's footsteps, she, who was not talented, became a superior of the half-step invincible realm and became one of the first 3 high-level people of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. In order to make Li Kuang-tu look at her more, she used all means. She did many tasks that others didn't want to do and killed many people that others didn't want to kill. For decades, Li Kuang-tu secretly lurked in East Island. Phoenix's hands were full of blood, not only the blood of the enemy, but also the blood of her own people. So even inside the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, many senior superiors didn't like her existence. At least she could clearly feel that Dawn, who had a similar status to her, had wanted to kill her more than once. Phoenix didn't care about these. The crazy state of treating a man as everything made her almost fearless. So for more than 20 years, she became the best sword in Li Kuang-tu's hand. In terms of combat capability, Phoenix was not as good as Dawn Daybreak, but she was indeed the best. It was just that this sword had extremely strong feelings. So when the purgatory of Heaven Capital entered the human world, when Li Kuang-tu brought Princess Ziyu back to East Island, but Ziyu couldn't get pregnant, on a special day, she found Li Kuang-tu and said that she didn't want to be his best sword, but his best woman. Li Kuang-tu, who lost his son, was extremely paranoid at that time, so he didn't refuse Phoenix's request. The pregnancy seemed to be going well, but what was difficult was that Phoenix had made countless preparations before that. The chaos in Snow Country broke out. Her and Li Kuang-tu's son was born. The purgatory of Heaven Capital came to Tianan. Everything completely calmed down. During the recovery period, Li Kuang-tu often accompanied Phoenix, took care of her mood, and spoiled their child. She let go of her martial arts and her power in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. She gradually felt Li Kuang-tu's gentleness. In the past 2 years, she seemed to have changed from a good tool to a real woman. In the peaceful time in Tianan, she, Li Kuang-tu, and her child were like the most ordinary family of 3. It was just that such good days seemed to have an end. When Li Kuang-tu left Heaven Capital for more than 3 days, although Phoenix no longer managed the specific affairs of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, she could still clearly feel the changes in the atmosphere inside the purgatory of Heaven Capital. The first to disappear was Li Kuang-tu. Then Dawn began to disappear with a large number of elites of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Tianan was still calm, but the purgatory of Heaven Capital had begun to stir. Phoenix began to feel restless. In just a few days, she had woken up from her dreams several times. She had asked Li Kuang-tu, but Li Kuang-tu seemed to have really regarded her as his own woman and protected her very well, so he didn't say anything to her. Phoenix didn't know what Li Kuang-tu wanted to do this time, but she knew Li Kuang-tu's ultimate goal very well. She could also understand why he casually set up the headquarters in Heaven Capital and let Heaven Capital continue to decay, because Li Kuang-tu had never wanted to stay in Heaven Capital for a long time. His ultimate goal, the headquarters of his ideal purgatory of Heaven Capital, was Xianyuan City. It had always been. From another perspective, this goal was to kill Li Tianlan, which was what Li Kuang-tu wanted to do most now. Chapter 9:59. When he woke up from the nightmare once again, it was still a quiet and unchanging night outside the window. There seemed to be neat but light footsteps quietly walking in the distance, strictly guarding every corner of the vicinity. Phoenix, with a pale face and a cold sweat, sat on the bed in a daze. After a long while, she picked up her phone and looked at her watch. It was 10:23 in the evening. It had been less than an hour since she fell asleep. Phoenix subconsciously glanced at her side. The familiar and eager man was no longer there. Only a baby, who looked about 2 years old, was lying beside her. His hands and feet were wide open, and his breathing was even and quiet. Phoenix reached out her hand and gently touched the baby's soft face. She watched him reach out his chubby little hand and move it. A smile appeared on her pale face, and then she took a deep, deep breath. In the dream, it was a strange space. All kinds of lights filled all senses. The surrounding buildings were blurry, but the crowd was extremely clear. Chi controlling, ice condensing, fire flaming, thunder shocking. The light of martial arts of various realms rendered the world in the dream into various colors. The domain of the invincible realm and the sword light crisscrossed. The chaotic explosions and roars kept ringing in his mind. There were figures everywhere. There were corpses everywhere. Blood was everywhere. The twisted faces roared as they charged in the same direction. In that direction, Chi soared into the sky, crazily circling around, and the crowd kept falling. The people behind pressed forward without hesitation. Death and life bloomed violently in the sharp sword light. Corpses were everywhere, and blood flowed like a river. But from the beginning to the end, no one retreated. The sword light turned from strong to weak in a very short time. A figure in the middle of the crowd was covered with blood. Countless weapons pierced into every corner of his body. Blood flowed, the sword energy disappeared, and the figure clearly appeared in the dream. That was Li Kuang-tu's face. At that moment, Phoenix woke up with a start and subconsciously covered her wildly beating heart. Over the past few days, she had several similar dreams. She didn't know why. Although she had been telling herself to be optimistic, there was always a very pessimistic idea in her subconscious. In fact, when she was with Li Kuang-tu many times, she had hinted to him that she said, "the purgatory of heaven capital." In fact, it was already very good now. There was no need to pursue other things. She said that looking at the current purgatory of heaven capital, she was already very satisfied. She said that as long as he could be safe, even if the purgatory of heaven capital did not exist, it did not matter. Li Kuang-tu never expressed his stance. This silence lasted for more than 2 years, until he suddenly left Heaven Capital City and went to Yuzhou from Xianyuan City, and then lost contact with her. Only then did Phoenix understand that Li Kuang-tu didn't listen to anything she said. His heart had always been extremely firm, resolutely doing what he thought he should do. Phoenix pulled out her mobile phone. After a moment of hesitation, she dialed Li Kuang-tu's number. "Sorry, the number you have dialed is unavailable." The cold voice sounded again and again, from Chinese to English. Feeling a little annoyed, she took out her phone, hesitated for a moment, and called Daybreak directly. The phone rang for a moment before it was picked up. Daybreak said hello. "Tomorrow?" After a brief silence, the Phoenix slowly spoke. Daybreak was silent for a moment, and then said slowly, "To be exact, we will leave in 2 hours. Phoenix was slightly surprised. So soon? There was an accident. An hour ago. As soon as Li Tianlan returned to Emperor Dong's palace from Yuzhou, someone sent a letter of challenge to Li Tianlan. At present, it is not clear who the challenger is, but the other party showed the strength beyond the peak of the invincible realm in an instant. This matter has now spread throughout the dark world, and everyone's eyes are focused on Xianyuan City. This is a good opportunity. I will leave Tianan for East Island as soon as possible." Daybreak said the news that could not be hidden in any way, and his tone was a little alienated. "What's the matter? Come to me." Phoenix looked at the sleeping child beside her and lowered her voice. "I have something to ask." Daybreak did not speak for a moment, as if thinking about how to refuse, but finally agreed. "Okay, I'll be right there." Although it was close to midnight, and any single man who approached Li Kuang-tu's woman would attract some suspicious eyes, Daybreak was undoubtedly not one of them. In the purgatory of Heaven Capital, he was the only superior of the invincible realm besides Li Kuang-tu, the real second in command, and also Li Kuang-tu's brother. He was absolutely trusted, and Daybreak did not need to worry about many things. The reason why he did not want to come was that he did not want to see Phoenix. Phoenix, silently. She hung up the phone and was in a daze for a while. Then she found a more conservative pajamas and put them on. She bent down and kissed her son. Seeing that he showed no sign of waking up, she quietly got out of bed, went from the bedroom to the living room, and waited quietly. In less than 5 minutes, there was a knock on the door from outside. Phoenix pressed a button beside her hand, and the door opened automatically. Daybreak walked in. "Haven't rested yet?" He sat opposite Phoenix and asked in a casual tone. "I slept and woke up." Phoenix's voice was faint. She paused and smiled bitterly. "I've been a little uneasy these days, and I've been having nightmares. I feel that His Highness will be in danger. Can you tell me where he is now?" "Don't worry." Daybreak looked at her for a while and said slowly, "I know His Highness's strength very well. Even if there's any danger, he can escape unscathed." "You," Phoenix carefully probed, "are you going to participate in the final battle in Beihai?" "I don't know." Daybreak answered without hesitation. "My task is to go to East Island. As for His Highness, when I last talked to him, he was still in Yuzhou. I don't know where he is now. Maybe he's in East Island." His tone was very formal, but Phoenix still heard the perfunctory tone in it. Phoenix had a complicated look in her eyes. "Or The one who appeared in Xinyuan City tonight to challenge Li Tianlan is His Highness? Definitely not. Daybreak was speechless. You think too much. His Highness is not that bored. Although he has the strength, according to His Highness's character, hiding in the dark is his favorite. But this challenge has indeed attracted a lot of attention. We could transfer more people to East Island while everyone's attention is diverted. Heaven capital of East Island. Daybreak's eyes dimmed, and he said softly, I don't like that country, but I really miss the sky-reaching pavilion in Heaven capital of East Island. His Highness's intention this time is also very simple. To regain control of the dark forces in East Island. That's our bottom line. Phoenix looked at him for a while and suddenly asked, Who will go to East Island with you this time? Daybreak was stunned and didn't speak for a while. Give me a list. Phoenix's tone was a little tough. Daybreak hesitated for a while and then slowly nodded. Okay. Chapter 960. The so-called name list was really just a piece of paper filled with names that looked somewhat densely packed. Daybreak had been carrying it with him, and the creases were all new. Obviously, before coming here, Daybreak had been studying the list in his hand. Phoenix took the list and looked at it carefully, and it was a little hard. In the past 2 years, she had been focusing on her child and Li Kuang too, and she had not been involved in the specific affairs of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. As a giant with the foundation of a superpower, no matter how peaceful the dark world was, there would always be people coming to the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Not to mention that the dark world was far from peaceful in the past 2 years. The purgatory of Heaven Capital had expanded a little in the past 2 years and absorbed some newcomers, so there were some names on the list that Phoenix had never heard of. She tried hard to guess the strength they had from some familiar names, and then combine the strength of these people. It was probably the total strength of the purgatory of Heaven Capital that would go to East Island. This kind of speculation was certainly not accurate, but it could not be said to be completely outrageous. Phoenix's brows gradually furrowed. These people. Daybreak looked at Phoenix quietly, his eyes deep. Phoenix wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. In the end, she didn't say much. According to the configuration on the list, combined with her memory of the internal structure of the purgatory of Heaven Capital more than 2 years ago, the number of people going to East Island this time was about 5,000 to 7,000. Daybreak of the Invincible Realm led the team. Dawn of the Half-Step Invincible Realm assisted him, followed by 5 people at the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm and 12 superiors of the Thunder-Shocking Realm. These 19 people formed the high-end lineup of the expedition to East Island. Except for Daybreak and Dawn. Among the remaining 17 people, 14 were acquaintances of Phoenix, and only 3 were newcomers who joined the purgatory of Heaven Capital in the past 2 years and were loyal and trustworthy. Phoenix had a deep understanding of most of them. Their combat effectiveness was not exaggerated, but the most important thing was their loyalty. These people could be said to be absolutely loyal to Li Kuang Tu inside the purgatory of Heaven Capital. They were also the elders of the Li family who first came to the purgatory of Heaven Capital from Li Honghe after the collapse of the Li family. In other words, if the Li family and the purgatory of Heaven Capital had to be separated, these people were undoubtedly pure people of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. What are you guarding against? Phoenix raised her eyebrows slightly. She looked down from the top of the list. After the Thunder-Shocking Realm were the experts of the Fire-Flaming Realm, and a large part of the experts at the peak of the Fire-Flaming Realm were also the seniors of the Li family. These people were not absolutely loyal to Li Kuang Tu, but they were irreplaceable to the core of the Li family. Every name in front of her could be said to be a trustworthy person. Emperor Dawn's palace will probably go to East Island as well. Daybreak said blandly, if they really show up, the situation will become very complicated. So what His Highness means is, don't take those who are indecisive and don't know their own position. Don't take those who go to East Island to fight. Don't take those who don't dare. Don't take those who don't want to fight. Although there aren't many of them, there's no doubt about their ability to execute. At the critical moment, no matter who they're facing, as long as it's not their own people, they'll dare to make a move. Phoenix was silent for a while and sighed softly. I've never understood why we have to go against Emperor Dong's palace, and why we have to be enemies with Li Tianlan. Daybreak seemed to be stunned. He gave the phoenix a strange look and smiled. I can't believe you would say something like that. Phoenix's body stiffened slightly. She looked down and said, "You're mocking me, aren't you?" Daybreak looked at her and smiled quietly, without saying anything. Why did they have to go against Emperor Dong's palace? Why did they have to be enemies with Li Tianlan? 2 years ago, the phoenix was the one who did the most of these things. Many elders in the Li family were dissatisfied with Li Kuang-tu's various disdain and contempt for Li Tianlan. Many elders didn't want the Li family and the purgatory of Heaven Capital to split. When the voices below grew to a certain extent, as a leader, Li Kuang-tu had only 2 choices. The first was to compromise, and the second was to be tough to the end. Li Kuang-tu was not a person who would compromise. So Phoenix became the best sword in his hand. The strength of the half-step invincible realm was enough to deal with internal problems. To put it bluntly, a part of the Li family was loyal to Li Tianlan. Those who really regarded Li Tianlan as young master died in the hands of Phoenix. At that time, she thought that the Li family was the purgatory of Heaven Capital, and the purgatory of Heaven Capital was the Li family. At that time, she thought that Li Tianlan didn't deserve the title of heir of the Li family at all. Only Li Kuang-tu was the legitimate heir of the Li family. At that time, she thought that Li Tianlan would be killed sooner or later. Such a person who had become extremely paranoid under the influence of Li Kuang-tu now asked why she wanted to be enemies with Li Tianlan. I know I'm not qualified to ask this question. Phoenix was silent for a long time, then took a deep breath and said slowly, "But today is different from the past. I'm a woman, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. I admit that I'm afraid. If Li Tianlan was just a thunder-shocking realm expert, or even a half-step invincible realm expert, I wouldn't change my mind. But now it's different. Li Tianlan is different, and so is Emperor Dong's palace. I know Li Tianlan's achievements and the strength of Emperor Dong's palace now. It's no exaggeration to say that in terms of strength, we are no match for Li Tianlan. Emperor Dong's palace has been established for a short time, but it doesn't mean that it's weak. We can forget about Sai City, Mount Shu, the Giant Group, and even the Samsara Palace. Today, Li Tianlan, with the help of the Flourishing Age Fund, is already stronger than us. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital looks strong now, and our strength is no worse than most superpowers. But this does not include Li Tianlan, because you and I, and even His Highness, are not completely sure how much of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital's power will belong to us, and how much will belong to Li Tianlan when the Purgatory of Heaven Capital faces Li Tianlan. I'm afraid. We targeted Li Tianlan before because he was not a member of the Li family, but he became the heir of the Li family because of Senior Li's support. His existence will threaten His Highness's future layout. Besides, Li Tianlan hasn't grown up, so it's not difficult to kill him. Now it's different. We are no match for Emperor Dong's palace. At least, the odds of winning are not very big. So I think we should look at Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan rationally. Really, there's no need to target him, and it's meaningless. Maybe the two of them will ease up and cooperate to some extent and develop together. That's the best. Phoenix said a lot. Her voice was slow, with a little confusion. Daybreak waited for him to finish and then simply said, "Naive." Phoenix bit her lower lip and didn't speak. When he was weak, we had a lot of reasons to deal with him. But because of Samsara Palace, it was hard for us to kill him. His Highness has always been afraid of the master of Samsara Palace. Facts have proved that she deserves everyone to retreat and be afraid of her. During the final battle of Heaven Capital, the master of Samsara Palace helped the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Do you think there's no price? At that time, the master of Samsara Palace made it clear that she wanted us to deal with the Wang family of Beihai with her. The chaos in Snow Country was actually planned when the master of Samsara Palace met Her Highness, or even earlier. The reason why His Highness agreed to the master of Samsara Palace was not only because he could get the grudges between East Island and the Wang family of Beihai, but also because in his expectation, the possibility of the master of Samsara Palace dying was almost 100%. In the chaos, no one could see the whole picture of the general trend. The hostile forces, the friendly forces, and the allies were all superficial. The Samsara Palace was destroyed, and the master of Samsara Palace died. If His Highness wasn't seriously injured, he would destroy the East Emperor Palace, kill Li Tianlan, and take all the power and resources of the Li family into his own hands. There are a lot of reasons to kill him. For example, he's not a member of the Li family and doesn't deserve to control the future of the Li family. For example, he has great potential. If he doesn't die, he will inevitably become a threat to the purgatory of Heaven Capital in the future. For example, because of Senior Li's preference for him, a large part of the Li family's people are in Li Tianlan's favor. For example, there are 100 reasons. But no one expected that Wang Tianzong would reach the supreme realm in the chaos. His Highness was seriously injured, and at that time, even if I entered the invincible realm and fought with Li Tianlan desperately, I was basically no match for him. What was even more unexpected was that Li Tianlan would grow so fast. Xinyuan Phone, the 13th floor, the power beyond the peak of the invincible realm, the power to kill ordinary invincible realm experts at will, all the resources of the giant group, the embryonic form of the new group, the internal intelligence and connections of the 6 groups that the Flourishing Age Fund got in advance. Unimaginable money. One is Emperor Dong's palace with the foundation of a dynasty, and the other is the Wang family of Beihai. Daybreak's voice gradually deepened, and he finally sneered. I don't like you, and Dawn even wanted to kill you several times. We didn't touch you, not because we were afraid of you, but because we were loyal to His Highness. Over the years, you killed a lot of so-called traitors. In fact, those so-called traitors didn't do anything wrong. Those were all brothers who fought side by side with us in life and death. But His Highness needed them to die. What could we do? At that time, compared with the newly established East Emperor Palace, the purgatory of Heaven Capital was like a giant looking at a clown. So you weren't afraid at that time, and you didn't hesitate to kill people. At that time, no one would be afraid of Li Tianlan, who had just entered the secular world. If there was no Samsara Palace, he was a nonentity. Countless forces in the entire dark world have analyzed many times. According to the situation when Li Tianlan just entered the secular world, if there was no Samsara Palace, if he wanted to live, he could only let go of the past grievances and turn to the Wang family of Beihai or the Lin clan. Who would care about such a young man at that time? But now, are you afraid? 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 Huh, you're afraid now? I'm afraid too, and so is His Highness. In Li Tianlan's current state, when he holds Xinyuan Phone, His Highness won't be his opponent. So what if he's afraid? Can you stop doing a lot of things if you're afraid? If you're Li Tianlan and I'm His Highness when I'm strong, I want to kill you, but I can't. When you're strong, can we let go of the past grievances and get along well with each other? Naive, ridiculous, stupid, idiotic, silly. Daybreak opened his mouth, but didn't spit out the letter in the end. Phoenix lowered her head and said nothing. So, the situation is obvious. Daybreak took a deep breath and said blandly, to deal with Li Tianlan, all the previous reasons are no longer reasons. Everything that Emperor Dong's palace has now is indeed what His Highness wants and desires, but it's not the main reason. In this case, there's only one reason to deal with Emperor Dong's palace, and that is self-protection. Do you understand? Self-protection, do you understand? Here, under our feet, is the complete purgatory of Heaven Capital and the complete Li family. A large number of masters, elites in all aspects, and the foundation and wealth left by the Li family are all here. Li Tianlan is the heir designated by Senior Li before his death. From his point of view, he is the legitimate heir of the Li family. Now he has Emperor Dong's palace. When Emperor Dong's palace becomes strong, do you think he will recognize the status of the purgatory of Heaven Capital? Will he live in harmony with the purgatory of Heaven Capital? To say the least, even if Li Tianlan doesn't do anything for His Highness, How much older is His Highness than Li Tianlan? Decades later, if His Highness is gone, what will happen to the purgatory of Heaven Capital? Daybreak stood up irritably, lit a cigarette, took a drag, and said coldly, decades later, maybe Li Tianlan's state will not decline. That is his most powerful peak. At that time, if His Highness is gone, believe me, Emperor Dong's palace doesn't need to do anything. A large number of people in the purgatory of Heaven Capital will take the initiative to pack up the purgatory of Heaven Capital and give it to Emperor Dong's palace. At that time, have you ever thought about what will happen to the children of you and His Highness? We can also assume that this situation will not happen. You can say that it will definitely not happen. But it hasn't happened and it won't happen are two different things. When it hasn't happened, can you really be sure of anything? You don't dare, and His Highness doesn't dare. Even if Li Tianlan is here, he can't guarantee anything. This kind of conflict can't be reconciled at all. It can only be a fight to the death. What about you? You actually want to live in harmony with Li Tianlan. Ha! If Li Tianlan hears this, he will probably die of laughter. Phoenix's face was pale, and countless emotions were fiercely rolling in the depths of her heart, with various flavors and extremely complicated feelings. I can tell you clearly that His Highness is indeed in Beihai now. The final battle in Beihai has been brewing for a long time, and all the ambitious forces will get involved. You don't know what this final battle means. From another perspective, the result of this final battle directly determines whose era the Dark World will belong to in the future. No one will miss such a grand event, even if it means a lot of blood and death. His Highness has protected you too well. If you're not stupid, you should know that you can't change anything. Think about your child. So, don't expect to live in harmony with Emperor Dong's palace. Everything you said just now, I'll take it as a joke. Well, it's very funny. Look, I laughed. Daybreak's voice was steady. He said he laughed, but in fact, there was no expression on his face at all. But a faint giggle really did ring out. The laughter was very light, very childish, with undisguised curiosity and innocence. Phoenix froze for a moment. Daybreak also froze for a moment. In the next second, the two's expressions changed drastically. That voice was so small, childish, and innocent. It was obviously the voice of a child or a baby. There was a baby here. That was the child of Li Kuang-tu and Phoenix, the only heir of the purgatory of Heaven Capital in the future. But the problem was that such a big child couldn't see his mother when he woke up. How could the voice be laughter? Phoenix's body exploded in an instant. She directly bounced up from the sofa and rushed to the bedroom. The invisible sword energy directly tore the door of the bedroom. The door silently turned into pieces on the ground. Phoenix stood at the door, maintaining the posture of rushing in, and her whole body froze in place. At this moment, her body was as numb as a sculpture, and her face was pale and frightened. An indescribable coldness directly enveloped her whole body. She froze there and stared at the soft bed in the bedroom, as if she had seen the most terrible thing. Daybreak rushed over in the next second. His eyes were fixed on the bed in the bedroom at the first moment. Then his body also froze there. His scalp was numb. At this moment, Daybreak's whole body was numb. He opened his mouth, took a step forward, closed his mouth, and stopped. He looked like he didn't know what to do or what to say. The atmosphere in the bedroom was quiet and weird. In the sight of Phoenix and Daybreak, a young man in a long black windbreaker embroidered with golden patterns was sitting leisurely by the bed, reaching out a hand and teasing the baby on the bed. His face was calm without any emotion. The baby was lying on his back, holding one of his fingers with chubby hands, smiling happily. Li Tianlan, Li Tianlan, Li Tianlan. Why was he here? When did he come here? How did he get in? What did he want to do? Countless questions burst in Phoenix's mind in an instant, and her body trembled more and more violently. Heaven Capital, guarded by countless elites of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, had no blind spots. Phoenix of the half-step invincible realm and Daybreak of the invincible realm were in the living room. But Li Tianlan appeared in the bedroom silently. What did this mean? Just thinking about it was enough to make people shudder. Come in and sit down. Li Tianlan gently tapped the baby's soft face with his finger. He turned his head and glanced at the door casually. Phoenix swallowed hard and walked in carefully, as if she was afraid of stimulating Li Tianlan. Li? No, His Majesty East Emperor. Phoenix's voice trembled so violently that it sounded like she was crying. She was in a state of unprecedented fear. Because she understood Li Tianlan's strength, she particularly understood her son's fragility at this time. It looked like a picture of an ordinary adult and a baby, but in fact, it was like the gap between a giant and an ant. Perhaps with a little force unconsciously, her child's life might end in an instant. Phoenix's breathing became more and more rapid. He's a lovely child. Li Tianlan smiled. What's his name? Phoenix trembled and looked at Li Tianlan's fingers, stroking the baby's face in horror, unable to speak. Li Huawu. Daybreak took a deep breath and walked to Phoenix's side. He said in a hoarse voice, Your Majesty, don't you think it a little inappropriate for you to suddenly appear in the bedroom of the mistress of the purgatory of Heaven Capital in the middle of the night? Chapter 9:61. Phoenix became extremely nervous in an instant. She stared at Li Tianlan's movements without blinking and even held her breath. Daybreak's question was very powerful, but in such a situation, it could only make people feel powerless. Li Tianlan laughed. Suitable. His voice was indescribably feminine in the dim light of the bedroom. I want to come here, so it's suitable here. Tell me, what's not suitable? Daybreak took a deep breath and sneered. Your Majesty is really domineering. But don't forget, this is not Emperor Dong's palace, but the purgatory of Heaven Capital. You're wrong, Li Tianlan said indifferently. This is the Li family. Can you deny that? Daybreak paused slightly. Li Tianlan's eyes were a little playful. Think it through before you speak. You'll die if you say something wrong. Daybreak closed his eyes and tried to calm himself down. After 2 or 3 minutes, he opened his eyes again and said calmly, Your Majesty, are you here to threaten the purgatory of Heaven Capital with this child? I'm not that bored, and he's not a person who will compromise, even if this is his son. Li Tianlan smiled sarcastically and gently flicked his fingers. The baby's small body slowly floated in the air and fell into Phoenix's arms under Daybreak's extremely nervous gaze. Phoenix subconsciously held her son tightly. Her body slumped on the chair behind her, and she breathed heavily. So, Li Tianlan took a deep look at the baby and said calmly, Li Quantu has gone to Beihai now, and he's going to deal with me? For the self-protection you said? He really didn't want to threaten Li Quantu with this child. Li Quantu's character meant that he would rather sacrifice everything than compromise. At this critical juncture, since Li Quantu had decided to participate in the decisive battle in Beihai, he would certainly not retreat. The most important thing was that the child in front of him was the only grandson of the old man who raised him. No matter what, it was difficult for Li Tianlan to kill him. Daybreak's face was extremely ugly. He didn't expect that Li Tianlan would suddenly appear here. Moreover, he didn't know how long Li Tianlan had been here. It seemed that Li Tianlan had heard all the conversation between him and Phoenix just now, so that he had no way out now. He clenched his teeth tightly and remained silent. I'm just here to see how he's recovering. Li Tianlan smiled. Now it seems that even if he hasn't recovered to his peak state, he's not far from it, right? Daybreak still said nothing. Aren't you going to say something? Li Tianlan sat on the bed. The person who sent me the letter of challenge in Emperor Dong's palace tonight should have contact with you, right? Did he join hands with the purgatory of Heaven Capital? If it's just the purgatory of Heaven Capital, you may participate in the final battle of Beihai, but you absolutely have no other energy to worry about East Island. After a pause, he glanced at Daybreak and suddenly said, The first time we met was in East Island, right? The look in Daybreak's eyes became somewhat complicated. He nodded and said hoarsely, Your Majesty's memory is very good. You seem to have saved me. Li Tianlan sat on the bed, his body completely relaxed, and his eyes were a little unfocused. I don't know if you believe it or not, but at that time, I thought we could be friends, allies, and even our own people. At that time, we cooperated with the Samsara Palace, so we were naturally allies with His Majesty. Daybreak said quietly, I mean our own people. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. I've never understood why you are so persistent in wanting to split the Li family. Until now, do you still think your surname is Li, Your Majesty? Daybreak asked in reply. My name is Li Tianlan. Shaking his head, Li Tianlan continued. Rushi and I are engaged. She's already my woman. The plan that sounded absurd back then, at least now, seems to have no problem. Rushi will slowly recover, and we will have children. He will be the future patriarch of the Li family. This is also what Grandpa wants. He looked at Daybreak and said seriously, What's wrong with this plan? That kind of Li family is your Li family, just a puppet. Daybreak said softly, It's meaningless to argue. Li Tianlan said calmly, I'm not here today to discuss this. Contact him for me. Daybreak stared at Li Tianlan closely. His body was tense, as if he was ready to fight at any time. What if I refuse? It's meaningless to refuse. I already know where he is. It's just an ordinary call. Is it necessary to refuse? Li Tianlan laughed. Daybreak looked at Li Tianlan for a long time. He nodded slowly and said softly, It makes sense. It makes sense. He took out his mobile phone, hesitated, and dialed Li Kuangtu's secret number. The phone was quickly connected. Li Kuangtu's indifferent voice sounded from the other end of the phone. What's the matter? Your Highness. Daybreak hesitated and was still thinking about how to phrase it. Li Tianlan's voice had come over. How's the scenery of Beihai? On the other end of the phone, Li Kuangtu suddenly fell silent. Li Tianlan reached out his hand, and Daybreak handed the phone to him. Li Tianlan switched the video mode casually. Li Kuangtu's face appeared on the screen. His eyes were deep and quiet. The place where he was a little dark, and there was an obvious sound of waves. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. The two looked at each other for a while, and Li Tianlan took the initiative to say, Long time no see. Li Kuangtu narrowed his eyes slightly. All kinds of subtle emotions flashed in the depths of his eyes, and finally turned into indifference. You went to my house just to say long time no see, to see your state, and by the way, to see the current state of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Li Tianlan said calmly, I think it's time for me to take back the purgatory of Heaven Capital. What do you think? Do you deserve it? Li Kuangtu sneered without hiding it. You hide in other people's homes, and I do whatever I want in yours. You should ask yourself whether you deserve it or not. Li Tianlan's voice was flat and indifferent. Do whatever I want, do whatever I want. Li Kuangtu repeated it twice, and his whole person became more and more indifferent. If you want to fight now, I can accompany you to the end. In Heaven Capital, you can do whatever you want. I only have one attitude. He looked at Li Tianlan with no expression. If one person in the purgatory of Heaven Capital dies today, the whole Emperor Dong's palace will not have any peace in the future. I can't kill you, but I can't kill you. Anyone in Emperor Dong's palace, except for you, I can kill whoever I want. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. There was an undisguised madness in Li Kuangtu's indifferent eyes. No matter what you want to do, Li Tianlan said lightly. Li Tianlan said faintly, You should know that you can't succeed. If it were in the past, you might still have a chance, but you're too cautious. Maybe the treason case many years ago left a psychological shadow in you. You don't like any uncontrollable variables and always want to wait until the situation is perfect before you take action. But in fact, how can there be so many perfections? Li Tianlan smiled. If you hadn't been afraid of the Samsara Palace and killed me directly, there wouldn't be so many troubles now. But you didn't dare to do it at that time. What can you do now? The situation is different. So, Li Kuangtu asked expressionlessly. Come back. Li Tianlan said calmly. I can give you a chance. There is no need to make things too ugly. You come to Emperor Dong's palace, and the position of the first deputy palace lord is yours. The purgatory of Heaven Capital can be preserved. As the deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, You can also continue to be the leader of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital doesn't need to be integrated with Emperor Dong's palace, and it can still maintain a good independence. In the future, my child and Rushi can inherit the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. If you have a different opinion, you can also let Huawu inherit the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Emperor Dong's palace and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital will form a permanent alliance. What do you think? Li Quantu was silent for a long time. In all fairness, if Li Tianlan could do such a condition, it was really good. At least, most people in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital could accept it. But in the end, under such circumstances, even if the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and Emperor Dong's palace formed an alliance in the future, there would be a primary and secondary relationship. The status of the two sides was basically impossible to be truly equal. So Li Quantu shook his head. Good condition, but I have a better choice. Still looking forward to the so-called final battle in North Sea? Li Tianlan's voice was deep. You will die. For my sake, don't force me to kill you. Don't say that, Li Quantu said lightly. The name of the Li family is actually not important anymore. Emperor Dong's palace and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital have developed to this point. If the two sides go to war, there's only one goal, that is, interests. It's just that our relationship is subtle. The name of the Li family can make us devour each other faster after we destroy each other. Li Tianlan, you can't give up the interests of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Similarly, I am also very jealous of your Emperor Dong's palace. Everything you have now is what I dream of. I want it, so I will take it. There is no need to talk about reason and right or wrong. Li Quantu took a deep look at Li Tianlan. See you in North Sea. With a clear sound, the video call was completely hung up. Li Tianlan sat on the bed, expressionless. An indescribable aura emanated from him little by little. The warm heaven capital seemed to begin to cool down in an instant. Daybreak's scalp was numb again. He didn't know what happened, but he clearly felt that the moment he hung up the phone, Li Tianlan became extremely terrifying. Your Majesty, you'd better remember that this is the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, Daybreak said in a deep voice. This is the Li family. Li Tianlan replied blandly. He stood up, walked to the bedroom window, and looked at the deep night outside. The indescribable aura kept spreading from him. At this moment, he felt like he was in a nightmare that was about to be scared to wake up. Daybreak's hair all stood on end. I am very disappointed in you. Li Tianlan's deep voice echoed slowly. If he hadn't died in Linen, he would have been very disappointed in you now. You want East Island, Emperor Dong's palace, and everything I have, the extremely terrifying aura kept spreading and diffusing. You have always said that I don't deserve. But have you ever thought that if you want to take away everything I have, do you deserve it? It was not the sword intent, not the power. It was a completely indescribable feeling. The whole space seemed to be slightly distorted. You can't get anything. Li Tianlan turned his back to Daybreak. He said in a low voice, we can't go anywhere. You. Daybreak's face was pale. Under the great pressure, his body was tense to the extreme, and he was about to attack with all his strength. Don't move, Li Tianlan said in a low voice. The indescribable aura became completely clear, and it directly wrapped Daybreak in it. It was not the sword intent, not the power. Vaguely, it was like a kind of energy driven by the sword energy. Daybreak's body was stiff on the spot. It was not that he didn't want to move, but he really couldn't. Li Tianlan, shut up. Li Tianlan said slowly. Daybreak's voice suddenly disappeared. He kept his eyes open, and his mouth kept opening and closing, but there was no sound. No one is my opponent now, not even Li Quantu. He said softly, as for you want to go to East Island? If I don't let you go, you can't go. Crack. Above the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, the indescribable aura spread to the extreme. The space was distorted to the extreme. In an instant, the dark night sky seemed to be completely torn apart by an extremely sharp blade. An incomparably dazzling and blazing white light appeared in the pitch-black sky. It was like a sudden flash of lightning. The white light spread wildly in the sky and instantly turned into the shape of a net. The dangerous and sharp white line completely lit up the night sky. The entire headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital turned pale under the sudden flash of lightning. Daybreak's eyes were dull, and his face was pale. At this moment, he finally felt this kind of energy. He also felt the incredible sword energy that drove this kind of energy. There were more and more white lightning above the sky. A large amount of light silently spread all over the sky. The sword energy above the ground had turned into an ocean in the blink of an eye. The dense sword energy covered every corner of the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in an instant. Li Tianlan's figure was glowing. In the windless bedroom, his black windbreaker fluttered wildly in the wind. On the black windbreaker, the complex and profound golden patterns were flowing unscrupulously, emitting dazzling golden light. The vast and endless sword energy did not cover the entire Heaven Capital, but only the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The sword energy continued to gather in the headquarters, more and more, and finally rushed to the sky in an instant, blending with the white light above the sky. All the visions disappeared in an instant. Endless sword chi, boundless lightning, golden light, everything disappeared without a trace. It was as if everyone had experienced an illusion. Daybreak's body regained its freedom, but he did not dare to move. His voice trembled for the first time. "What did you do?" Li Tianlan seemed a little tired. He turned his head to look at Daybreak, and then at the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in front of him. After a few seconds of silence, he whispered again, "I'm very disappointed in you." His figure gradually became illusory, fainter, transparent, and finally disappeared completely. Daybreak rushed out of the bedroom, the living room, and the courtyard at once. Li Tianlan had disappeared without a trace. Heaven and earth were still the same. However, he suddenly felt an endless pressure. Daybreak's face changed, and he rushed all the way. The gate of the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was quiet. A team of elites on patrol passed by. Outside the gate, a team of elites who seemed to have just returned from drinking outside was talking and laughing as they walked to the gate. When they saw Daybreak standing at the gate, they were all stunned. Then they subconsciously bent down, but they didn't have time to speak. The moment they bent down, their bodies leaned forward and their upper bodies seemed to touch an invisible boundary. The sword chi, which was as majestic as the ocean, suddenly soared into the sky. Several elites of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, who were standing at the gate and bending down, were instantly torn into two halves by the extremely sharp sword energy. Their upper bodies completely disappeared. The lower bodies outside the gate were still intact. Daybreak's body stiffened in place. It was not until this moment that he understood what Li Tianlan meant when he said that he wouldn't let them go. The entire headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital had been completely blocked by Li Tianlan with sword energy. No one could enter or leave the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital unless their strength was similar to his. In such a blockade, even a mosquito couldn't fly in. A sword sealed the city. Daybreak suddenly turned his head and looked at the night sky around him. The night sky was extremely quiet, and only the vast sword energy was constantly roaring in the nothingness. It was invisible, but extremely real. This scene could be said to be a real prison. Chapter 962. It was as if there were countless blades and sword radiance quietly in the dark night sky. Almost illusory, but the bloody scene just now was so real. Daybreak stood in front of the gate of the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital dully, and could not say a word for a long time. He sealed the city with one sword and turned it into a prison. Even if he was an invincible realm expert, the scene in front of him was almost completely beyond his understanding. In Eastern Europe, Wang Tianzong's sword energy could travel tens of thousands of meters. That range was enough to cover the entire Heaven Capital. But that was an extreme outbreak. The purgatory of Heaven Capital was only the most central part of Heaven Capital. It was not surprising that Li Tianlan's sword energy could directly cover the purgatory of Heaven Capital. But it was strange how he could make the sword energy completely seal the headquarters of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. There was no practical meaning in bragging, and Li Tianlan was not so bored. Daybreak was very clear that since he said he could not go anywhere, then such a blockade would not dissipate in a short time. Daybreak stood in place for a while, and finally walked quickly to the gate. The guard at the gate had rushed out and was standing there looking at the corpse at the gate with an inexplicable look. Seeing Daybreak coming over, several guards bowed at the same time. Sound the alarm and inform all high-level people above the thunder-shocking realm to gather at the gate. Daybreak said in a deep voice. The guard froze for a moment and did not react for a while. The purgatory of Heaven Capital naturally had its own alarm system, and the alarm in the guard room at the gate was an orange major threat alarm. The purgatory of Heaven Capital had been rooted in Tiannan for more than 2 years, even when Li Guangtu and Daybreak were in the weakest state due to serious injuries. Such an alarm had never sounded. Go! Daybreak glanced at him and said in a harsh tone. The guard took a deep breath and suddenly turned around and rushed into the guard room. Ear-piercing alarms suddenly rang wildly in the headquarters of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. All the alarm lights inside the purgatory of Heaven Capital began to shine. Countless searchlights that had been set long ago shone on every blind spot inside the purgatory of Heaven Capital. The weapon terminals placed everywhere were all activated. The combatants kept their posts strictly, and the rotational personnel began to pick up their weapons and gather urgently. Outside Heaven Capital, countless forces who were observing the purgatory of Heaven Capital stared at the headquarters of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, which was as bright as day. They had no idea what had happened. Daybreak was still standing at the door, staring at the night sky outside the door coldly. Streaks of lightning flashed in the distance. The thunder-shocking realm experts in the purgatory of Heaven Capital rushed over one after another. They followed Daybreak's line of sight and saw a few corpses, but other than that, everything was normal. A few corpses, perhaps this was a provocation to the purgatory of Heaven Capital. But no matter what, it was not enough to trigger an orange alarm. Second Highness, what's the matter? A short man with an extremely fierce appearance took a step forward and asked with some doubt. He was an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm who joined the purgatory of Heaven Capital in the past 2 years. Before joining the purgatory of Heaven Capital, he was also a well-known loner in the dark world. His codename was Grey Ant. Now he was in charge of the internal guard of the headquarters of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Although he had joined the purgatory of Heaven Capital for a short time, he could already be regarded as one of the real core higher-ups in terms of position. Daybreak didn't say anything. He just stretched out his hand. A dagger slipped out of his sleeve, and he held it tightly in his hand. Daybreak took a deep breath, and the sword intent of the invincible realm continued to condense in his hand. In an instant, the dagger had been completely wrapped in a dazzling ball of light. A group of thunder-shocking realm experts watched silently, and everyone looked extremely confused. Daybreak flicked his fingers gently. The ball of light in his hand floated to the gate with the dagger. The floating speed of the ball of light was extremely slow, but along the way, the space in front of it was constantly being torn and twisted. Everyone could see that Daybreak had almost gone all out this time. The ball of light floated to the gate. The sword energy surged. The alloy door trembled incessantly in the violent sword aura, leaving behind sword marks one after another. The ball of light condensed with a large amount of sword energy slowly floated through the gate. Then it disappeared. It was silent. There was no sign. It was as if it had never existed. All the light was completely swallowed up in an instant. Crack! In the slight sound, the dagger cracked, and then silently turned into powder, fluttering in the night sky. There was a dead silence around. Everyone opened their eyes subconsciously. Looking at this scene, they couldn't speak at all for a while. Daybreak's face was extremely gloomy. The moment his attack crossed the gate, he once again felt the majestic sword energy. The vast sword energy completely enveloped the headquarters of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. It was so illusory, not to mention the surrounding thunder-shocking realm experts. Even Daybreak could only vaguely feel the existence of the sword energy. He could only vaguely feel the existence of the sword chi, but the sword chi was so real that his full-powered attack had been silently melted away. This meant that if he were to go in himself, he would not be able to last more than a few seconds. The huge gap was completely revealed in front of Daybreak because of this sword. This gap was almost too big for Daybreak to understand. What made his heart even colder was that after entering the invincible realm, he did not feel that the gap between him and Li Kuang-tu was so big in the occasional sparring with him. Li Kuang-tu's injury might not have healed, but at least for now, he came to a very real but not very willing to believe conclusion. Li Kuang-tu was really no match for Li Tianlan. As you can see, Daybreak was silent for a long time before he said in a low voice, "The headquarters has been completely blocked. From now on, no one can enter or leave. I have no way to break this blockade, and I don't know how long this blockade will last, so..." Daybreak gritted his teeth fiercely. "Our logistics reserves are very sufficient. From now on, no one in the purgatory of Heaven Capital is allowed to leave the headquarters. Members who are performing tasks outside are on standby. Without orders, no one is allowed to get close to Heaven Capital." His voice was extremely hoarse and difficult, but it sounded like thunder in the ears of others. The headquarters of the purgatory of Heaven Capital was completely blocked? Like a joke, like a nightmare, like whatever it was. All in all, it sounded like complete nonsense to others. But in fact, Daybreak's actions just now had proved the truth of all this. Who did it? Gray Ant's eyes were cold and manic. He had many flaws in his character, but the biggest advantage was that he could not change his mind once he decided on something. In other words, he was absolutely loyal. That was why Li Kuang-tu and Daybreak let him be in charge of internal defense. But now, someone had completely blocked the headquarters without him noticing. They couldn't go in or out. They were completely imprisoned. Gray Ant felt that he, the so-called head of internal defense, was completely like a decoration. "It's Li Tianlan." Daybreak's tone was a little erratic. "A few minutes ago, he came here, saw Hu, and talked to His Highness. Then, he blocked the headquarters." "Damn Li Tian, Dong Wang." Gray Ant cursed subconsciously. Then, he realized something. His voice became softer and softer, and his face gradually paled. No one thought Gray Ant's performance was terrible, shameful. No one knew when it started. When the Dark World mentioned Li Tianlan, it was like the Dark World mentioned Sword Emperor a few years ago. It was not that there was no hostility and killing intent, but when it came to him, it was mostly a sense of powerlessness and fear. Li Tianlan easily blocked the headquarters of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. In other words, if he wanted to, he could completely destroy this place and kill everyone at that moment. Li Tianlan, the Li family, Emperor Dong's palace, purgatory of Heaven Capital. Li Kuang-tu, all kinds of ties were entangled, and everyone's heart was a little complicated. A group of thunder-shocking realm experts suddenly fell silent. If that's the case, another middle-aged man who looked to be in his 50s came out. "Daybreak, does that mean we can't go to East Island?" From his simple name, one could see the current structure of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Most of the newly joined elite experts would always be respectful to Daybreak and call him Second Highness. Daybreak was indeed the second in command of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, and all the old people of the Li family would call him by his codename out of habit. They were all old brothers who had experienced countless life and death situations together, and there was no such thing as high or low status between them. Among the old people of the Li family, even some experts at the peak of the fire-flaming realm dared to put their arms around Daybreak's neck and drink with him in their spare time. But if everything went well, fewer and fewer people would call him by his codename, and more people would call him Second Highness. This was destined to be a very sad thing. So Daybreak had always cherished the present. For these brothers who had experienced countless life and death situations with him, he had never known what was the face and aura of the invincible realm. Daybreak smiled bitterly. This was the most uneasy problem for him now. Regaining control of East Island was the bottom line of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, and it was also the most important goal of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in the near future. Li Quantu participated in the final battle of Beihai. When East Island was empty inside, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital occupied East Island. If the final battle of Beihai went well, Li Tianlan would die. At that time, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital would annex Emperor Dong's palace, unify Tianan, and take Xianyuan City as its new headquarters. The power of East Island would become the extension of the power of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. At that time, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital would expand to an incredible level. But now, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital planned to send 2 groups of people to East Island. Dawn had secretly arrived in East Island with the first group, and Daybreak led the second group of people with the strongest combat capability to set off before the final battle. The scheduled departure time was tonight. But Li Tianlan now directly locked the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Outsiders couldn't get in, and their own people couldn't get out. Although Dawn was a superior a half step to the invincible realm, his strength was not enough to conquer East Island. When Daybreak was trapped in the headquarters, this plan could be said to have completely failed. That was to say, from now on, they were already out of the battlefield in East Island. Daybreak gritted his teeth again, and his feminine face looked colder and colder in the night. In fact, His Majesty still cares about old times. In the crowd, another middle-aged man said softly, "Otherwise, why would he lock up the Purgatory of Heaven Capital? With his strength, when we fight against him, he can completely kill us all. But now he came and went, only locking up the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and making us out of the battlefield in East Island. When did he ever kill one of us?" The crowd quieted down again. Daybreak didn't need to look back to know who was talking. The person who said this at this time was destined not to appear on the list of people going to East Island. But under such circumstances, when these words were said, everyone had some complicated feelings in their hearts. Daybreak's eyes flickered, and he slowly said, "I will inform His Highness. If the matter in Beihai is not urgent, he may still have time to come back to solve this problem." Chapter 963. After breakfast and watching the morning news, Li Huacheng, who rarely had a leisurely morning, walked through the backyard and came to his office. The buildings in the Hidden Dragon Sea didn't have a specific office space. The 9 directors each had a standalone building that wasn't small. There was a front yard and a backyard. The backyard was the resting area. After passing by a small yard with grapevines, the front yard was the office area. Ma Si, the chief secretary of the president, had come to the office 10 minutes before Li Huacheng came. He cleaned the office, boiled a pot of water, and sorted out yesterday's documents. When everything was done, Li Huacheng, who had a good sense of time, walked in slowly. "President." Ma Si greeted him with a smile. Li Huacheng smiled, handed him a bag of tea, and said softly, "I'm drinking black tea today. It's the taste of home. I miss it." "Okay." Ma Si took the tea. Seeing that the president had no orders, he left quietly. Li Huacheng walked to the desk and saw at a glance a document that Ma Si deliberately put in a conspicuous position. The document was printed with the seal of the Ministry of Security of Zhengzhou State. It was bright red, which meant that it had a very high priority. Li Huacheng frowned slightly, picked up the document, and glanced through it quickly. He seemed a little surprised, then lowered his head and read it again slowly. Ma Si pushed open the door of the office, walked in with boiling water, and began to make tea. "Is the news confirmed?" Li Huacheng raised the document in his hand and asked softly. A strange color flashed in Ma Si's eyes, and then she nodded. "It's true." Now the whole dark world should have known the news. Li Huacheng was a little speechless. After a few seconds, he laughed and said, "Of course I know it's true, but He looked at the seal at the bottom of the document. With this seal, it proved that the news was 100% genuine. But some things, even if they knew it was true, were still unbelievable. I probably feel the same as the president. I also think it's a little unbelievable. It's just that this thing really happened. Mossy laughed and said with some emotion, "A mysterious expert challenged Dong Wang Li Tianlan. If the opponent is not tired of living, then it can only mean one thing. Tut." Li Huaqing shook his head. "The dark world is not peaceful again. It has never been peaceful." Mossy shook her head slightly. Li Huaqing thoughtfully picked up the document and read it again. He suddenly asked, "What do you think about this matter?" Mossy was at a loss and did not understand what Li Huaqing meant. The special warfare systems of all countries have detailed records of what kind of people and experts there are in the dark world. Under such circumstances, it is unlikely that the so-called super-mundane experts will appear. Of course, nothing is absolute in the world. In the past few decades, there have been some invincible realm experts who are out of the sight of all countries, but only occasionally. Moreover, none of them has reached the peak of the invincible realm. The intelligence is very clear. The challenger showed the strength beyond the peak of the invincible realm in an instant. What does this mean? There's already a saying in the dark world that the East Royal world is invincible. Wang Tianzong's whereabouts are unknown. In the current dark world, the combat capability level is very obvious. Li Tianlan can barely be regarded as unique, followed by Li Guangtu and Lin Fengting. Both of them have surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. What about Lin Fengting and Li Guangtu? It is ridiculous that there is no expert at the peak of the invincible realm in the whole dark world. Such a situation is too rare. I believe that the mysterious challenger has the strength beyond the peak of the invincible realm. That is to say, even if the opponent's combat capability is not at the level of Li Tianlan, it should be very close to it. It is probably at the same level as Lin Fengting and Li Guangtu. If such a person has no ambition, then there is no need for him to challenge Li Tianlan. If he has ambition, then where was he before? With his strength, if he wants to develop his power, he has long been a big shot in the dark world. Anyway, such strength can't be obtained overnight, right? He has kept a low profile for so long. Why did he suddenly jump out in front of everyone? He even wants to challenge Li Tianlan, who is known as East Royal. Mossy handed the brewed black tea to Li Huaqing and casually sat down opposite him. He had been by Li Huaqing's side for nearly 15 years, and the relationship between a secretary and a leader had almost transformed into a familial relationship. Thus, he was not overly reserved most of the time. He gently tapped the black tea in front of him and said thoughtfully, "You mean it's because of the upcoming decisive battle in the North Sea? The Prime Minister has some partners, such as Wang Qinglei, and even some foreign forces," Li Huaqing said in a low voice. "I don't know if they found Wang Qinglei, and then Wang Qinglei found the Prime Minister, or if the Prime Minister took the initiative to contact them. But the Prime Minister once told me personally that there is an unknown majesty in the dark world." His Majesty. This word had always been a specific title in the dark world. For example, Wang Tianzong used to be. For example, Li Tianlan now. This title basically meant invincibility in the world. Mossy's face changed slightly. No matter how secretive His Majesty is, he is still His Majesty, and his strength can't be too weak. The Prime Minister can know him, which means that he is also interested in Beihai. It is understandable that East Island is determined to get Beihai, but in the whole incident, the intervention of the Vatican and the Jiang family of South America is obviously driven by someone. If you want to integrate these forces, you really need a fighting force that can control the situation. His Majesty should be him, and it can only be him. If I'm not wrong, he should be the behind-the-scenes manipulator who pushed for the final battle in Beihai. Some of his ideas even affected Wang Qinglei and the Prime Minister. In other words, the Prime Minister was used by him. He is indeed a powerful figure. He challenged Li Tianlan in Tiannan. Ma Si's eyes suddenly flashed. Does this mean that he is attracting attention, and the real layout the last means will be used in Beihai? That is to say, the final battle in Beihai is about to begin? You can understand it that way. Li Huaqing frowned. But it is not necessary. It is right to attract attention. But in this case, doesn't His Majesty think it is best to continue to hide in the dark? If a mysterious superior, who is likely to be at the same level or slightly weaker than Li Tianlan, hides in the dark and makes a sneak attack, even Li Tianlan does not dare to be careless. So why does he want to expose himself before the final battle? Is this His Majesty a fool? Ma Si complained in her heart. She chose her words carefully and expressed her personal thoughts. Maybe he thinks there is no need to hide, or what he is about to set up in Beihai is more important than his own existence. He is an expert who has surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. What else can be more important than him? Murderous weapons? Ordinary murderous weapons can't even hurt Li Tianlan. More important than him? Only. Li Huaqing suddenly paused. Ma Si suddenly came to her senses and said subconsciously, more important than him. Only the superior at the same level as him, whose identity is more hidden, and it is impossible for him to appear in Beihai. Li Kuangtu. The next moment, Li Huaqing and Ma Si said a name at the same time. Li Huaqing suddenly frowned, hesitated for a moment, and said in a deep voice, "Help me contact Li Tianlan." Ma Si took out her mobile phone, found a specially marked number, and dialed it directly. The phone was quickly connected. Li Tianlan's calm voice came from the other side of the phone. "Okay, President, this is Li Tianlan." Li Huaqing smiled and went straight to the point. "What do you think of the mysterious superior? He may not be very mysterious, but we really don't have evidence to prove his identity. We just have some guesses. In the final battle in Beihai, the ultimate force that Chun Fangqing can rely on is probably him." I suddenly remembered something. Li Huaqing quietly waited for Li Tianlan to finish, and then slowly said, "There has been no news from the purgatory of Heaven Capital for more than 2 years. I don't know how Li Kuangtu's state is. Tianlan, some things can't be ignored." His tone was very light, but the meaning of the reminder was extremely obvious. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment. He was a little surprised by Li Huaqing's sudden concern, but he was not surprised. Li Huaqing and the academics still remained neutral. They withdrew from the cooperation with the Prince Group, and also did not make any comments on Li Tianlan's approach. Their neutral attitude was obvious. But now even a fool could see that Chun Fangqing's chances of winning were not good. And the academics seemed to be neutral, but for the Prince Group and Chun Fangqing, it was a real betrayal. If Chun Fangqing could win, it was hard to say what would happen to Li Huaqing himself, but the academics would definitely not have a good life. However, Li Huaqing always left some leeway. This neutral attitude was the leeway he left. Even if the Prince Group won in the end, the scale of the academics might shrink, but it would not completely disappear. But even so, it was not what Li Huaqing wanted to see. His heart was more complicated. If Li Tianlan won, it meant that from then on Emperor Dong's palace would be out of control like Beihai. If the Prince Group won, the future of the academics was doomed to be difficult. He thought about it again, and finally could only speak according to the strength of the other party. Li Tianlan was strong, so Li Huaqing put his chips on Li Tianlan. Such a reminder was a complete expression of goodwill. Li Kuangtu is now in Beihai. In fact, I just came back from Heaven Capital last night. Li Tianlan said calmly. What is certain is that if the final battle will break out in the near future, then no one in the purgatory of Heaven Capital needs to worry except Li Kuangtu. Li Huaqing's heart suddenly shook, and he subconsciously narrowed his eyes. He couldn't understand the meaning of Li Tianlan's words for a while, but the point he wanted to say was not this. Now the most important thing to worry about is Li Kuangtu. I don't know how Li Kuangtu's current state is, and the mysterious expert who is challenging him is also very strong. At present, it is certain that there are already several invincible realm experts involved in the next final battle. If these two people are added, what are the odds of winning? There was no response from the other side of the phone for a long time. Just when Li Huaqing thought that the phone had been hung up, Li Tianlan's voice sounded. "Don't worry." His tone was calm with extreme confidence. "They can't make any waves. I'm going to have breakfast. He said slowly, goodbye. The phone was hung up directly. Li Huaqing looked at the phone in his hand, lost in thought. The whole dark world was now speculating how strong Li Tianlan was now. But to this day, Li Tianlan's strength was still a mystery. The strength he had shown so far was not enough for others to have a clear judgment of his combat capability. He thought of Li Tianlan's tone. It was a kind of peace and calmness that everything was under control. Did Li Tianlan really have the absolute confidence to overturn the luxurious lineup of two experts who had surpassed the peak of the Invincible Realm and several Invincible Realm experts by himself? If he really had this ability with such a lineup, did it mean that he could really sweep the entire dark world with his own strength? He might not have reached Wang Tianzong's realm at that time, but the Chosen One was never a realm. If he could do this, Li Tianlan would be the real Chosen One of this era before Wang Tianzong recovered from his injury. Li Huaqing took a deep breath. He picked up the teacup and took a sip of his hometown's black tea. After a long time, he sighed sincerely. The times are really going to change. Just as Ma Si was about to say something, his phone rang again. But it was not the work phone in Li Huaqing's hand that rang, but Li Huaqing's personal phone. Ma Si stood up and wanted to leave. Li Huaqing waved his hand and motioned him to sit down. He took out the phone and glanced at the number. He narrowed his eyes, and his expression was a little subtle. He didn't expect to receive this call at all. He didn't know why this call was made at this time. Li Huaqing hesitated for a moment, but still pressed the answer button, but he didn't speak. Okay, President, this is Jiang Shan. On the phone, Jiang Shan's calm voice rang out unhurriedly. Okay. Li Huaqing responded faintly, indifferently. Both sides held the phone and were silent for about 10 seconds. Jiang Shan was the first to laugh. Well, President, I'm reporting to you this time. The work in Beijiang is very difficult. Li Huaqing's eyes were deep and a little unfathomable. Did something unexpected happen again? Ma Si finally knew who was on the other side of the phone. He raised his head in surprise and glanced at Li Huaqing. No. Jiang Shan chuckled and said, Beijiang is still stable now. The chaos 2 days ago has caused a lot of pressure on everyone. Today, I'm mainly reporting this matter. At present, Beijiang has preliminarily counted the number of the families of the deceased, and the first batch of pensions was issued yesterday. Today, the second batch of pensions will also be issued. This money can be guaranteed to fall into the hands of every family member. The total amount is more than 400 billion, and it will probably be distributed tomorrow afternoon. More than 400 billion. Li Huaqing's body shook. He had expected this amount, but he didn't expect Jiang Shan to take out the money so quickly. It was impossible for the entire Beijiang to have 400 billion now. Li Huaqing's expression suddenly became serious. When Jiang Shan dealt with the world in Beijiang, the Hidden Dragon Sea was in a meeting. Several directors almost watched the whole process of Jiang Shan's handling, as well as his promises and speeches afterward. 2 days had passed since the incident. Among the 9 directors, 2 had made public comments on the matter. Chen Fangqing directly evaluated Jiang Shan's behavior as a thief of the state. Dongqing Wudi's words were equally fierce, and he used the word wolf's ambition as an evaluation. Jiang Shan's various behaviors showed that he wanted to take Beijiang as his own and turn the land of more than 1 million square kilometers in Zhongzhou State into the Jiang family's own base and headquarters. He did so and expressed so, but after all, he didn't say it clearly. Jiang Shan was a very mature guy. He didn't say it clearly, but it seemed to be a buffer between him and Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing also tacitly did not give any orders to Beijiang. Now Zhongzhou State was obviously in troubled times. The final battle in Beihai was the highlight, but in the end, it was just the beginning. The general election was coming, and there were all kinds of things to deal with. Everyone planned to deal with the problems in Beijiang after the general election. But now, Jiang Shan directly called him and talked about the current situation in Beijiang very straightforwardly. Li Huaqing was at a loss for a moment. What was he going to do? The finance of Beijiang couldn't come up with more than 400 billion yuan. But Jiang Shan got the money now. The major consortiums in Zhongzhou state were very stable and had a normal relationship with the Jiang family, so the money could only come from foreign forces. Jiang Shan's report could be said to be arrogant and a little brazen. Did he want to lay his cards on the table only 2 days after the incident? Li Huaqing's serious expression became extremely cold little by little. There was still a buffer for some things to be done, but if he blatantly laid his cards on the table and wanted to publicize it, he would be courting death. At this moment, Li Huaqing directly made up his mind. If Jiang Shan really thought that he wanted to take down Beijiang blatantly because he had turned to foreign forces, then he would inevitably react. At all costs, he would react most violently. This was the bottom line that could not be violated. If Jiang Shan dared to touch him, Li Huaqing would let him die. Where does the money come from? Foreign forces? Skull and Bone Society? Elite Club? Or World Financial Union? The 3 forces he mentioned were the world's top super consortiums, and they were also the forces that had the ambition and courage to plot Beijiang. Behind the elite clubs stood the major European giants, and the main leader was the Rothschild family. But with King Tong and Paul's serious injuries, Rothschild's position as the leader was also in jeopardy. All the giants now had other ideas. Behind the Skull and Bone Society was Star State and the whole of America. They were equally powerful. With the support of Star State, they were even more domineering than the elite clubs in many cases. The World Financial Union was a relatively loose organization, but it also had a very special factor. Its headquarters was located in Arad, and it was backed by countless energy and money. Although it was loose, it could also unite sometimes. The elite clubs of Europe, the Skull and Bone Society of Star State, the World Financial Union of Arad, and the Wang family of Beihai, and the flourishing age fund of Zhongzhou State were almost the 5 giants of the world financial world. In the field of wealth, they were completely equivalent to the super forces in the dark world. The flourishing age fund wanted to take over Beijiang, but Li Tianlan was one step ahead. The Wang family of Beihai had no time to care about other things. Then the answer was obvious to Li Huaqing. There were only 3 organizations left. Li Huaqing's voice was very light and indifferent, without the slightest sharpness and determination. But Jiang Shan heard an unparalleled sense of danger in it. He was almost sure that if he really had these foreign forces behind him, and if he really dared to admit it, then in less than an hour, he would face the fiercest action of Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing was gentle, but it did not mean that he really had no temper. As the president, he could not be indifferent to this kind of theft. Jiang Shan's mind was in a mess. The smile in his tone gradually disappeared, and he became serious and solemn. President, whether I believe it or not, I can guarantee in the name of the parliament and Beijiang that I did not commit treason. His voice was clear and strong, with great weight. Oh, Li Huaqing gave a non-committal response. Come to Beijiang, President. Jiang Shan suddenly said, come to Beijiang and have a look. There are no foreign forces here. It is still the territory of Zhongzhou State. The situation here is gradually stabilizing. There is only the Jiang family here. If you still believe me, if the parliament still trusts Beijiang, then come and have a look. Li Huaqing was silent for about 2 or 3 seconds. Then he raised his hand to look at the time and said indifferently, I will have lunch in Beijiang at noon. Jiang Shan laughed and said, I will go to the airport to meet the president later. Li Huaqing hung up the phone, narrowed his eyes, and seemed to be thinking. President Ma Si, who looked a little pale, hesitated and couldn't help but say, I don't recommend going to Beijiang. Li Huaqing came back from his contemplation, glanced at Ma Si, and asked why. The Jiang family's position is unclear now. Jiang Shan hides too deeply and is astute. In fact, we don't know enough about the Jiang family and Jiang Shan. If he really turns to foreign forces, you may encounter some unexpected special situations when you go to Beijiang, and you may be in danger. Ma Si said quickly, Of course, I understand your feelings. You're worried about the situation in Beijiang. I can go there on behalf of the president, see the situation there, and report to you as soon as possible. Why bother? Li Huaqing shook his head and stood up. Go with me. I am the president of Zhongzhou State. Beijiang is the Beijiang of Zhongzhou State. In our own country, I can go anywhere I want. His voice was low and calm, as if with great majesty. Jiangshan dares to invite me over, then I will go. I must go. When she gradually woke up from the deepest level of meditation, the cry of the baby next to her ears gradually became clear. She opened her eyes. There was a soft and faint light in her sight. A still, graceful, and even beautiful figure in pajamas leaned against the other side of the bed, holding a baby and carefully comforting him. Her eyes were a little dazed, and the bright electric light flickered slightly in her pupils. After about half a minute, she came to her senses, turned around subconsciously, and whispered, "Mom, let me do it. Tutu, Mom is here." The baby, who was less than 2 years old, had been weaned. She took the baby and kissed him gently on the face. The crying baby seemed to feel his mother's breath, and he became quiet. He grabbed his mother's arm with his little hand, hummed softly, and slowly fell asleep again. She waited for a while, carefully put the baby on the bed, and smiled apologetically at the woman beside her. Tutu usually sleeps very well. I thought he wouldn't wake up. You don't have to work so hard, do you? Summer Solstice looked at her helplessly. In the faint light, her eyebrows and eyes were extremely soft. Song Si gently stroked her son's sleeping face, and her eyes were gentle and firm. This was her son, her and Wang Shengxiao's son. The name Hao Yin was given by Wang Shengxiao. The nickname Tutu was given by Song Si. In the 2 years since she left Beihai, from the pregnancy to the birth of the child, the little guy in front of her seemed to have become all her hope. In silence, Song Si pursed her lips and whispered, "I can feel that I'm very, very close to the breakthrough. I know that, but I can feel that I'm very close to the breakthrough." Summer Solstice reached out and touched Song Si's hair, whispering, "But in fact, there's still a long way to go before the real breakthrough." Song Si's expression didn't change, and she whispered, "That's why you have to work harder." Her talent in martial arts was extremely outstanding even in Beihai. Excellent talent could enable her to enter the thunder-shocking realm without any bottlenecks or obstacles. But if it was so easy to break through to the invincible realm, how could this realm be worthy of the word invincible? Song Si had already been at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm 2 years ago. Pregnancy and childbirth might make her a little haggard, but it wouldn't make her state decline. She had been at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm for several years, but she couldn't find a threshold to break through the thunder-shocking realm and enter the half-step invincible realm. As Song Si said, she could feel that she was very close to the breakthrough, but she still had no clue. The peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Such a realm was naturally useful in the current situation faced by Beihai, but it could also be said that it didn't have much effect. Don't think too much, Summer Solstice sighed softly. I've been through it. In martial arts, sometimes it's more effective to let nature take its course than to rush for quick results. I'm a little tired these days. I need to take a rest and let myself relax completely. Maybe it'll be easier for me to break through. Song Si lowered her head, looked at her son, and was silent for a long time. "Mom," she called very naturally and whispered, "I miss home, and I miss him, and I want to help him." Her head seemed to be lower, and she said in a weak voice, "It's very dangerous for him to stay in Mount Dibbing, isn't it? Don't let your imagination run wild. Our alliance with Emperor Dong's palace is very stable at this stage. Li Tianlan is very strong now, and we're not weak. If we join hands with Emperor Dong's palace, there won't be any danger." Summer Solstice laughed. Strictly speaking, the place where they were now did not belong to any country. It was a private island in the Pacific Ocean, a secret industry of the Wang family of Beihai. The island was not big, but the facilities were relatively complete. In addition to hundreds of servants and logistics personnel with different duties, there were only Summer Solstice, Tang Shi, Song Si, and the newly born Hao Yin. Different important figures of the Wang family of Beihai were all placed in different areas. More than 2 years was not a long time, and there was no change between the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Summer Solstice spent most of her time recuperating. Tang Shi still controlled the business empire of the Wang family of Beihai, remotely commanding and dealing with endless things every day, and Song Si took care of the baby. Perhaps because she had been away from Beihai for too long, Song Si, who had given birth, began to suffer from frequent insomnia and became more and more anxious. With her willpower, it was naturally impossible for her to suffer from postpartum depression, but the fluctuation of her mood had a great impact on her. So she began to meditate and practice Kendo for a long time. In order to take care of her grandson, Summer Solstice lived with Song Si and taught her martial arts. The two made an agreement not long ago after the baby was weaned. If the stalemate continued, then after Song Si broke through the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and became a half-step invincible realm expert, she could leave here and return to Wang Shengxiao to help him. But Summer Solstice glanced at Song Si with a somewhat complicated look in her eyes. "It'll be fine," she said softly. "In order to let him concentrate, I haven't told the outside world. The current situation is actually very good. Shengxiao is very well prepared. If there are no accidents, we should be able to return to Beihai soon." "Really?" Song Si raised her head and looked at Summer Solstice in a daze. She was already a woman, and her appearance was still gorgeous and delicate, but there was a touch of exhaustion and haggardness that could not be concealed. "Yes, it's true." Summer Solstice held Song Si's hand and said with a soft smile, "It's impossible for Beihai to lose. Or to put it bluntly, when those people set the final battlefield in Beihai province, they can't win. To say the least, even if Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace don't participate in the final battle this time, Shengxiao will be fine, and Beihai will be fine. So don't worry." Song Si nodded hard, looked at Summer Solstice, and said seriously, "I believe you." Her face and eyes looked pure and flawless in the faint light, with a kind of piety that was enough to move people. Summer Solstice laughed. At this moment, she suddenly thought of the time when she was in Mount Dibbing. She thought of the night when her injury suddenly completely recovered. She thought of the world-shaking sword that split the sky of Beihai and split the entire Mount Dibbing. The heavenly sun that should not appear in this era. Invincible in the world. That was the real king of the world. That day, the moment he stood on Mount Dibbing, he called out the names of Song Si and Hao Ian. From that moment on, she knew the ending of the Wang family of Beihai in another era, or in the story that Lin Fengting and Qin Weibai once told. Because the man who called himself Li Dongsheng did not call out Wang Tianzong, Wang Shengxiao, or Summer Solstice. They might have died long ago. When most people had died, only Song Si and Hao Ian, who was still growing, could support the Wang family of Beihai. Song Si's talent was very good, but in fact there was a limit. According to Summer Solstice's judgment, she might be able to break through and enter the invincible realm, but she basically had no potential to reach the peak of the invincible realm. How could she fight against Li Dongsheng and the Sword Dynasty that did not exist in that story? There seemed to be only one answer. She merged with Worryless and turned herself into a half-human and half-metal monster. Summer Solstice could not imagine what kind of despair and madness it was. But after knowing the possible ending, looking at her daughter-in-law who had given birth to the eldest son and grandson of the Wang family of Beihai, she completely loved and doted on her from the bottom of her heart. At least in this era, she would try her best to change that tragic and cold ending. Song Si hesitated. Her voice was cautious. "How long will it take us to go back to Beihai?" This was the question she had always wanted to ask, but had never really asked. The place that she thought about day and night had a person that she missed dearly. After being away for so long, she missed him so much. Summer Solstice looked at her with a smile and said softly, "It won't be more than a month at the latest." When dawn broke, there was another heavy snow in the sacred state of Beihai. The white snow fell from the sky, silently. The whole Mount Dibbing quickly became silver. Wang Shengxiao stood quietly on the stage of formidable person, looking at Beihai that was still slowly turbulent in the distance. There was no sword light or sword energy in the depths of Beihai. The wind was calm, and the snow fell. He wore a coat and held a thermos cup in his hand. He unscrewed the lid and took a sip of tea. Wang Shengxiao laughed. The weather is good. Xianming stood beside Wang Shengxiao and smiled. He whispered, the average temperature of Beihai this year is 1.5 degrees lower than in previous years. It's still a little cold. I like this kind of weather. Wang Shengxiao nodded and said slowly, it can make people more clear-headed. Xianming kept his smile and said nothing. Is there any result? Wang Shengxiao suddenly asked. The matter of the mysterious expert challenging Emperor Dongwang was still fermenting. The whole dark world had been completely boiling overnight. Beihai had exchanged a lot of information with Emperor Dongwang's palace as soon as they got the news and tried to identify the opponent. This task naturally fell on Xianming. No, Xianming was a little helpless. There are too few experts at this level. Whether now or in the past, there are only a few of them. Lin Fengting and Li Kuangtu can be ruled out. The former will not challenge Li Tianlan, and the latter will not do such a thing. And they practice swordsmanship. There is sufficient evidence that the mysterious expert who challenged Li Tianlan mainly practices the domain. Neither Lin Fengting nor Li Kuangtu is suitable. Domain. Wang Xingxiao narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself. Xianming looked even more helpless. For hundreds of years, the dark world had always been dominated by swordsmanship. Although the domain was also a way of martial arts, and it was a way to directly enter the invincible realm, for hundreds of years, the real pinnacle of force in the dark world had always been swordsmanship. Experts who had entered the invincible realm in the research field had been emerging, but there were very few who could really reach the peak of the invincible realm. Shortening the time range, in the past 50 years, the experts at the peak of the invincible realm in swordsmanship included the two patriarchs of the Wang family of Beihai, the two patriarchs of the Lin clan, Li Honghe and Li Kuangtu of the Li family, and Li Shi. These names represented the peak of the invincible realm, and they were all martial arts giants in the field of swordsmanship. And there seemed to be only one expert who had reached the peak of the invincible realm in the field of domain in the past 100 years. Saint War Angel Arceus, who had died in the hands of tribulation. But Arceus was not an absolute expert at the peak of the invincible realm. Even when Wang Tianzong had not broken through to the peak of the invincible realm, Arceus in the state of coronation was a little worse than Wang Tianzong. As for the others, Gu Xingyun, Jiang Qiansong, the patriarch of Rothschild Paul, at best, they were only close to the peak of the invincible realm. Before the invincible realm, there was no advantage or disadvantage between swordsmanship and domain. But after the invincible realm, it was an almost irrefutable fact that swordsmanship was superior to domain. But now, a mysterious expert who had directly broken through to the peak of the invincible realm in the field of domain suddenly appeared, and he even dared to challenge Li Tianlan, who was vaguely the top expert in the dark world. When the major forces got the news, they all felt that their worldviews were shattered. After the shock and astonishment, they were confused, because such a person seemed to come out of nowhere. In everyone's knowledge, there was no expert who could reach the peak of the invincible realm in the field of domain at present. Then where did this expert who had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm come from at this time? Is there no clue at all? Wang Shengxiao asked. No. Xianming smiled bitterly. According to our intelligence, such a person shouldn't exist at all. At present, the only scientific explanation is that he has been secretly strengthening his strength. Even when he reached the peak of the invincible realm, he didn't expose himself until he broke through to the peak of the invincible realm and approached the supreme realm. That's the only explanation, but it's also, he hesitated. But it's also the most nonsensical explanation. Wang Xingxiao added with a smile. Xianming nodded with a bitter smile. That's true. If there is such a person, I can't imagine how wretched he will be. Even an expert at the peak of the invincible realm doesn't dare to enter the secular world. How can such a person break through to the peak of the invincible realm? Wang Xingxiao looked at the sea in the distance in silence and didn't speak. Xianming hesitated and wanted to say something. Say what you want to say. It doesn't matter if you're wrong, Wang Shengxiao said blandly. I think, Xianming frowned, hesitated for a moment, and said softly, when exchanging intelligence with Emperor Dong's palace, it was military counselor who contacted me. His tone was a little hesitant. I feel that military counselor seems to know something, but he didn't say it. Of course, this is just my intuition. There is no evidence. Wang Xingxiao drank some water again. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "It's understandable. At least in this matter, if military counselor really knows something but doesn't tell us, it means that they are not honest enough with us." Xianming said softly, "There's no need to worry about this." Wang Shengxiao coughed and laughed. "We also don't tell Emperor Dong's palace something. Cooperation is just cooperation, and it can be foreseen that after the final battle, the situation in Zhongzhou State will be in a new balance. Our cooperation with Emperor Dong's palace will also end at that time. At that time, we may become opponents fighting for interests. It's normal for them to hold back from us. But I don't understand," Xianming said with some doubts. "That's the enemy of Emperor Dong's palace. At least we are still cooperating. Why does Emperor Dong's palace hide the enemy's intelligence from us as partners? It doesn't make sense. If I were military counselor, if I knew something, I would certainly not hold back in this regard. Instead, I would rely on the strength of my allies." Maybe Wang Shengxiao's smile was a little strange. Maybe he thinks that Beihai is no longer capable of participating in this kind of thing, or Xianming lowered his head and did not speak. "It's clear, isn't it?" Wang Shengxiao said quietly. Xianming's face suddenly became ugly. The challenger was the enemy of Emperor Dong's palace. Beihai didn't belong to Emperor Dong's palace. Military counselor knew something, but he hid his enemy's intelligence from Beihai. Of course, this was not the way to protect one's enemy. Then there was only one possible explanation. The opponent was not only the enemy of Emperor Dong's palace, but also the enemy of the Wang family of Beihai. Hiding the opponent's intelligence might become the intelligence advantage of Emperor Dong's palace and Beihai after the end of the cooperation. Even further, Emperor Dong's palace hoped to hide this person's intelligence so that he could cause enough trouble for Beihai in the final battle of Beihai. Everyone knew very well. The reason why Li Tianlan participated in the final battle of Beihai was not that he had any good feelings for Beihai, but that the two highly similar organizations instinctively banded together after encountering a problem. It was impossible for Emperor Dong's palace not to understand the principle of interdependence. What was more, the result of the final battle of Beihai was directly related to the future layout of Emperor Dong's palace. From this point of view, if one wanted to put it bluntly, that was, in the final battle, Li Tianlan hoped that he could win. As for how much loss Beihai would suffer, it was not a problem he cared about at all. As long as Beihai still existed after the battle, Emperor Dong's palace, Xianming gritted his teeth. His evil intentions should be punished. We are allies, but also opponents. Wang Shengxiao's tone was calm and a little cold. Then Xianming glanced at Wang Shengxiao. "It's okay." Wang Shengxiao laughed. "Continue to investigate. It would be best if you can find out, but it doesn't matter if you can't. I will wait for them on Mount Dibbing." With hundreds of years of history, Beihai has proved one thing countless times. No matter what situation it is in, no matter what it encounters, Beihai can't be afraid of any enemy. Xianming was speechless. I remember a saying, Wang Shengxiao's voice was absent-minded. "It's a famous saying from my great-grandfather." Xianming was stunned for a moment, and then he understood. Wang Shengxiao's great-grandfather was the grandfather of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong. Before Wang Shengxiao, before Wang Tianzong, and before the old patriarch of Beihai. He was the #1 person on the divine list in the Dark World in that era. He was also the most famous tyrant among the patriarchs of Beihai. At his peak, he once stood on the stage, a formidable person, and said a famous saying that was still circulating in the Dark World. "I'm standing here. As far as I can see, those who refuse to surrender should be destroyed." Wang Shengxiao muttered to himself and whispered, "If you leave Beihai for a long time, will you miss it here?" Xianming seemed to be still immersed in that sentence. Hearing that, he was stunned for a moment and whispered, "Yes." His voice was very soft, but it was extremely firm. "I think all of us will." Wang Shengxiao laughed. "I miss the bright moon in Beihai and the snow in Shengzhou." His voice was so soft as if he was sleep-talking. "Xianming," he asked slowly, "have you ever seen The Breath of the Sea?" You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.